Hello Killer Bites fans, it's that time of the week again. Time for another disturbing and twisted true crime case that just might keep you up at night. I know I have a hard time falling asleep after some of these stories, but can't stop, won't stop. I have a question for all of you out there. Have you ever done a Google search for your birth date and then added in Florida? It's a fun game because the headlines that come out of Florida are almost always hard to believe, and there truly is one for every day of the year. If you were to search September 9th, 2006 in Florida, this is the story that pops up. And this story deserves to be at the top of the search results because it's truly an insane and disturbing story. Evil twins and a bachelor party gone horribly wrong. It's a shame something that was supposed to be such a fun, happy, and joyous occasion turned into something so dark and scary. And because one criminal just doesn't feel like enough for today, let me tell you, this case involves multiple criminals. Buckle up, kids. Let me begin with introducing you to identical twins, Dante and Donte Hall. You heard that correctly. Dante, D-O-N-T-E, and Dante, D-A-N-T-E. Interesting choice their parents made. I'm sure that never gets confusing. Dante and Dante are also known as the evil twins. Some say one twin is more evil than the other, but I'll let you decide for yourselves. Our story starts back in September of 2006 in Lake County, Florida. A group of guys are getting together to celebrate. It's a bachelor party meets house party type of situation. There were about 12 guys all together at this party. They're having a good time drinking and partaking in illegal substances. And no bachelor party is complete without strippers, am I right? 3 strippers arrive at the house somewhere around midnight. Everyone is pumped, ready to turn up. The girls ask if they can go into a back room to change clothes, and then they'll come back out, ready to party. The girls walk down the hall into a back bedroom. They emerge minutes later and return to the living room area. But just as things start to heat up, literally like 10 minutes later, 4 masked people bust their way into the party carrying firearms. One person holding a rifle and the others with handguns. Total vibe shift. 2 of those 4 unwanted party guests were, yep, you guessed it, the evil twins, Dante and Donte Hall. The person with the rifle was definitely the one in charge. He was calling all the shots. He instructed everyone to get on the floor. He told them to hand over their money, wallets, jewelry, anything of value that they had on their person. For the most part, everyone listened and followed his instructions. If any of these people had the slightest hesitation, he would yell at them and wave his gun around. He yelled at them, "If you don't do what I tell you to do, I'm gonna make this chopa dance." He then released a few rounds into the air pointed towards the ceiling. Keeson Evans, one of the partygoers, in an attempt to distract and appease the intruders, stated that there was a box of money in the back room. The man with the rifle then headed to the back room, only to find that the door was locked. Now he's pissed, so he goes right back out to the living room like a bat out of hell. He fires multiple rounds that are aimed at Keeson. One of the bullets knocks out the lights. Now it's dark and people are screaming. This is terrifying. Everyone is panicking. More shots are fired when the intruders finally cease fire and they make a run for it. They flee the house and hop in the getaway car and speed off as fast as they can. The intruders were only at this party for about 10 to 15 minutes, but caused so much damage for such a short amount of time. This robbery attempt left several men dead or severely wounded on the floor of this bachelor party. But this is not the ending of the story. Let me back up. The strippers that were hired, yeah, you remember them? Well, it turns out one of them, Angel Glenn to be exact, is the significant other of Dante with an O. Angel was hired to perform at the party on September 9th, 2006. She told Dante about her gig and about the party, and that's when Dante got the brilliant idea to take advantage of this situation and rob the people at said party. And so Dante and Angel devised a plan that when the girls were to go into the back room to change their clothes, Angel would call Dante to give him a breakdown of the room. Angel was on the phone with Dante, giving him the details of who was wearing an expensive watch, or who had on gold, or who was carrying anything expensive. There was mention of a cash stash somewhere in the house as well. So when the robbery begins, who would you guess is holding that assault rifle and calling the shots? None other than good old Dante. Can you believe that? So the paid female party guests were in on the crime. Those women walked into that party, sized up every single one of those men, and then Angel turned around and reported back to her boo thing, Dante. I cannot understand why she went along with this plan. It's so unnecessary. If you were hired to go to this party and they planned on giving you tips, you were always going to walk away with money. You don't need to bring weapons into this. They were ready to shell out their cash and celebrate all night. Sheesh. This was a senseless act of robbery that led to multiple people injured and the loss of 2 people's lives. Joshua Daniels was the first person hit, and he sustained injuries to his hands, thighs, abdomen, and torso. He was rushed to the hospital where he had an 18-hour surgery, but ultimately he survived. Willie J. Shelton received injuries to his stomach and forearm, causing him to remain hospitalized for 2 years, but is still a survivor. William Robinson was injured in the shoulder and stomach, but another survivor. Then there is Keeson Evans, who very unfortunately did not survive the hit to the head. He passed away immediately. The last victim, Anthony Blunt, sustained multiple wounds, but none that would render him dead upon impact. He was left there on the floor, slowly bleeding to death, and repeatedly saying, "I don't want to die, I don't want to die." Anthony went into cardiac arrest, and while paramedics tried everything that they could, he eventually passed. Since this incident, both Dante and Donte have been found guilty of a double murder as well as many other violations. Dante with an O, the ringleader, went to trial and was convicted right away. He is currently serving a life sentence. The jury found Dante Hall guilty of conspiracy to commit armed robbery, armed burglary, robbery with a firearm, attempted felony murder of Joshua Daniel, attempted felony murder of Willie Shelton, first-degree murder of Keeson Evans, and the first-degree murder of Anthony Blunt. Dante with an A had 2 missed trials before he was convicted. He and his attorney made several claims against his brother, such as, Dante has always been the aggressive one, the thug. He's the one that has the crew that he puts together to rob and pillage and carry AK-47s, and our client is mellow. While the jury was convinced that Dante with an A was indeed one of the masked and armed intruders from that night, the jurors were having trouble deciding if Dante had ever fired his weapon or if it was only his brother. Finally, the jury reached a verdict. He too was sentenced to life in prison, the first set of identical twins in the US to both be on death row. And what about the lovely Angel Glenn? The twins instructed Angel to take all of the stolen party jewelry and valuables to pawn shops and collect the cash. Seems like a solid plan, but she got caught. They identified that the jewelry was stolen. The cops tracked her down and arrested her. She was brought in for questioning, and at first, she denied knowing anything. She claimed to not know the jewelry was stolen or have anything to do with the robbery. They held her in jail for a few weeks. But after spending some time in jail, she decided to come clean and told the police everything she knew in the hopes of getting a lighter sentence. Angel later went on to testify against the brothers. She told the court that she had told Dante with an O about the party she was hired to dance at. He told her he wanted to rob them. She helped him get away clean. She was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Not long enough in my opinion, but okay. I'm sure you're wondering, what about the other 2 intruders? Who are they and what happened to them? These 2 go by the code names Shoo Shoo and Pig. And I honestly can't believe I'm saying this, but they were never identified. Can you believe that? If you know anything about these 2 men, who they are or where they are, don't put it in the comments, contact the police. Okay, y'all, this story is insane. A night that was supposed to be about something beautiful, celebrating the marriage of a dear friend, turned into something so ugly. So what are your thoughts on the evil twins? Do you think one or both of the twins are at fault for this crime? Do you think they are equally to blame? It seems pretty clear to me that they are both responsible, as well as the other masked intruders and the strippers. They all had the intent to commit a crime. breaking and entering, firearms, robbing people. I mean, the list goes on and on. But that's enough about what I think. What do you guys think about this case? Let us know in the comments below. This has been another episode of Killer Bites. I'm Brandy. Thanks for watching and hope to see you again soon. Stay safe out there.
This one German girl named Anneliese grew up with a bunch of pressure from her mom to be a devout Catholic. But little did this woman know her daughter would end up getting possessed by 6 different demons, including the devil himself. Anneliese had at least 67 exorcisms in the period of 10 months where she would do some crazy shit like eat bugs, bark like a dog, and lick the floor. The exorcisms got to be so bad, Anneliese stopped eating and ended up passing away from malnourishment and dehydration. Yeah, this girl's story is just like a horror movie. Well, actually someone did turn her story into a horror movie. The Exorcism of Emily Rose. Anneliese Michele was a devout Catholic girl living in Bavaria, Germany during the 1960s. And by devout, I mean she went to mass at least twice a week. Dang, twice a week? Homegirl's committed. Like, I used to go to church once every 2 weeks, and that was enough. So Anneliese grew up in a strict Roman Catholic household with her parents and 3 sisters. Also, Anneliese's mom gave birth to one of her kids before she was married, and everyone from her family and church said she was disgraced by having an illegitimate child. So as punishment for her sin, her mom literally wore a black veil on her wedding day. Wait, that is so wild to me, but honestly, I kind of vibe with the whole black veil thing. Well, Anneliese's mom was known for putting a lot of pressure on her daughter, especially when it came to religion. So could that have drawn her to the insanity that would happen next? In 1968, when Anneliese was 16, she suddenly blacked out at school and started walking around in some sort of trance. Anneliese said she didn't remember any of it, but her friends and family said it looked like she was in a daze. It kind of sounds like she was just sleepwalking to me. Like, maybe she accidentally fell asleep in a boring class and didn't want to admit it. Well, later that night, Anneliese was laying in bed when she said she felt like something was pushing down on her chest. Okay, now things are getting spooky. Definitely sounds like a ghost is involved. Almost 1 year later, the same thing happened. Anneliese woke up in a trance, but this time she started convulsing. So she was shaking uncontrollably, and it was so bad that she wet the bed. So after this weird episode, Anneliese's mom decided to take her to the doctor. I wonder what she told them. Hi, my daughter has been aimlessly walking around and not remembering it. Oh, and she's been tweaking out so bad that she wets the bed. Well, Anneliese's mom ended up taking her to their regular doctor and a neurologist. The neurologist did a scan of her brain and a few other tests and found nothing wrong. Both doctors said it was possibly some type of epilepsy that causes seizures, hallucinations, and memory loss. Okay, I'd believe that, but why would that not show up in the brain scans if epilepsy is a disorder that has to do with the brain? Anyway, after the diagnosis, Anneliese tried to go about her life, but she had another episode. This time, she was given meds that were supposed to stop the convulsions. She was also later put on another medication that was used to treat people with mental disorders like schizophrenia. But wait until you hear this. Anneliese said she started seeing devil faces at random times throughout the day. She also reported hearing demons whispering in her ears while she was praying. She said they told her she was damned and would rot in hell. Devil faces? That is terrifying. Also, I bet her mom wasn't happy to hear that the devil was doing a number on her daughter. Maybe it was to get back at her for having a kid before getting married. But I guess that wouldn't make sense for the demon to prey on Anneliese if she was born after her mom got married. So Anneliese also reported hearing knocking sounds in her bedroom and the scent of burnt feces. Okay, I thought the devil faces were bad, but I think the whole burnt feces thing may be worse. So I'm sure Anneliese's mom was freaking out already, but what really sent her over the edge is when she saw her daughter staring at a statue of the Virgin Mary. She said her daughter's eyes went completely black and her hands looked like they turned into thick paws with claws. Okay, this is strange. What does she mean by paws? Like, did her hands actually morph into them, or was her mom over-exaggerating? Or maybe Anneliese is a werewolf. Anyway, Anneliese and her mom started to think the meds weren't working. Anneliese thought she was possessed and even told one of her doctors that she felt the devil was inside her. It's interesting that she thought she was possessed herself. I've always wondered if possessed people were aware of it. Like, do they know they're being taken over by spirits? Apparently so. At this point, Anneliese is still having these convulsions, devil sightings, and weird poop smellings, but doctors aren't finding anything wrong on her brain scans. She went to several other neurologists too. One said she was neurotic, one said she was epileptic, and another said she demonstrated epileptic patterns, which I guess is different than actually being epileptic. Anyway, that last neurologist ended up giving her a stronger medicine to try and stop her convulsions, but it still didn't work. One of the neurologists supposedly told Annalise's mom to go to a Jesuit, but later he denied ever saying this. However it happened, Annalise went to a priest to see if the Lord could help us sister out. During this time, Annalise's episodes were getting way out of hand, or should I say, paw. Her parents said she was close to superhuman. She was ripping off her clothes, doing over 400 squats a day, crawling under the table and barking like a dog. That's some next level crazy right there. She also threw one of her sisters across the room like a rag doll and squeezed an apple so hard it exploded. Okay, so she's described as superhuman, has paws, and now she crushes apples in her hand. I'm starting to think the movie Twilight was made after her story too. So Annalise finally found a priest that was willing to put up with her craziness. He said she didn't seem epileptic at all and believed she was definitely possessed. He consulted with a bishop to get approved to perform an exorcism on her. Basically, an exorcism is a religious event where priests try to rid possessed people of evil spirits. And in order to perform an exorcism in the Roman Catholic Church, you have to get approval. The approval part is so weird to me. Like, I'm just imagining this priest filling out an exorcism application and waiting for it to be reviewed. So the bishop who approved the exorcism said it had to be done in private. So I'm guessing he didn't want the church to find out there was a demonic girl among the congregation. And the first exorcism was performed, but Annalise's episodes didn't stop. So the priest and bishop ended up doing at least 66 more exorcisms on her over the course of 10 months. Some of the exorcisms would last up to 4 hours. Oh my gosh, 4 hours is such a long time. Like, was this guy praying over her the whole time, or was he able to go to the bathroom and get a snack at some point? During her sessions, Annalise would speak in a super low growl. The priest and bishop who were hosting these anti-demon shindigs actually recorded the audio of some of them, and the recordings are creepy. But it wasn't really Annalise speaking. It was apparently the demons who were taking over her body. During her sessions, Annalise found out that there were 6 different demons possessing her: Lucifer, Cain, Judas, Adolf Hitler, Nero, and Fleischmann. First of all, I can't believe she was possessed by 6 different spirits, but these weren't just any old random demonic ghosts. They were supposedly the spirits of the devil, a biblical character who executed his own brother, another biblical character who betrayed Jesus, a Nazi dictator, a Roman emperor, and an excommunicated priest from the 1500s. And in her run-in with the spirit of the excommunicated priest, that was a big deal because apparently the guy was kicked out of the church for bad behavior, but the whole thing was on the down low. During her exorcisms, Annalise provided accurate details about the guy who the priest knew she wouldn't have known. So he assumed she really was being taken over by this guy. The different demons would also argue with one another through Annalise. Is that not the craziest thing ever? This girl literally had conversations with herself, but it wasn't her, it was Adolf Hitler and Judas. In some of their arguments, the supposed spirit of Hitler took over her and said, "People are stupid as pigs. They think it's all over after death." It goes on. Then Judas took over Annalise and called Hitler a big mouth who had no real say in hell. Okay, what? I would be flipping out if I were there during all of that. Also, how do they know who was talking? If there were 6 demons taking over, that had to get confusing. And at this point, I feel like the poor girl's body was probably so exhausted after not only 6 possessions, but the 67 exorcisms they performed on her. Like, give her a break. But these exorcisms started to get violent. During them, Annalise started banging her head against the wall and biting herself. Her fits of rage got so bad, her parents had to tie her up to stop her from hurting herself. But the weird thing about all of this is that in between the exorcisms, Annalise started to act completely normal. Her supposed seizures stopped, and no one knows if it was from the medication or if they stopped on their own. So then why were they still doing the exorcisms if the reason they were doing them in the first place was no longer a thing? Well, they continued, but Annalise stopped eating. And this wasn't just like skipping a meal or two. She literally stopped eating. Annalise got down to 68 pounds and was so weak her parents had to carry her around. Did they not think to take her to the doctor or get her meal replacement shakes or something? That sounds so bad that they had to carry around a 23-year-old. It's okay that you're starving. You're gonna be late for your exorcism appointment. Well, Annalise's state never got better. In fact, it got worse. She ended up passing away at age 23 from malnutrition, dehydration, and pneumonia. So she was possessed by 6 demons for over 10 months, and that's not even what knocked her out? That is so awful. And how did her parents not step in and stop the exorcisms or try to give the girl a meal? According to the testimonies, people think Annalise could have survived the pneumonia if her parents force-fed her. But, of course, they were too busy taking her to these creepy religious rituals so they could watch old biblical figures fight with one another through their possessed, malnourished daughter. After Annalise bit the dust, the bishop, priest, and her parents were all charged with negligent homicide. The prosecution claimed Annalise had epilepsy and psychosis and wasn't getting the treatment she needed, even though her autopsy later showed no signs of epilepsy. They believed the exorcisms were making it worse for her alleged disorders and thought the parents, priests, and bishop should have stopped the exorcisms and made Annalise see a doctor. The priest and bishop actually played some of the audio recordings of her exorcisms to back up their case. But would that really back up their case or make it worse? The recordings are pretty disturbing. They also said Annalise turned down medical treatment, so if they did force feed her or give her any medication, it would have been against her will. But at that point, how do they know if Annalise was even the one to refuse treatment? Like, that definitely could have been Hitler or Cain talking through her. The priest said he even sought medical attention near the end, but by that, he meant he brought in a doctor to watch one of the exorcisms, and the doctor just mentioned he didn't see any bruising on her. He seriously brought an audience to watch this poor girl? Well, the bishop's testimony actually contradicted the doctor's statement. He said Annalise had bruises all over her body, as well as black eyes and a swollen face. I'm not sure what to believe at this point, but based on the other facts, I'm sure this girl had a bruiser too. In the end, all 4 people were found guilty. The court determined that Annalise was unable to make her own decisions and should have been forced to get medical care. The priest and bishop were charged and sentenced to 6 months in prison with 3 years on probation, but it was later reduced to just the 3 years on probation. 6 months is already a super short sentence, but for them to not even serve it, seems like the court may have been showing favoritism to make sure they all had seats in the promised land. The parents didn't receive a sentence because the court decided they had suffered enough. I'm sorry, the parents suffered? How about their daughter who was literally tormented and starved to her demise? But get this, during Annalise's autopsy, examiners said her brain was in perfect condition. Well, anatomically. I'm sure she had a lot of other stuff going on there on an emotional and mental level. But yeah, the examiner said there were no signs of epilepsy, not even on a microscopic level. But some people believe that since Annalise didn't actually have epilepsy, the medicine she was on could have had something to do with her hallucinations and crazy episodes. Others believe Annalise was pressured to suffer for her mother's sin of having a kid before marriage. Because if you didn't already get it at the beginning, that was a big deal to this woman. She was known for encouraging Annalise to atone for her own sins through fervent devotion. Okay, this mom is trying to dump all her baggage on her poor daughter. That is so messed up. And the illegitimate kid the mom had, aka Annalise's sister, passed away during a surgery when she was 8. So some people think that the event fueled Annalise's desire to make amends for her mother's sin. Well, I don't care how much you love your mom and want to make up for her sin. It's not worth going through multiple brain scans, double sightings, floor lickings, bug snacks, or 67 exorcisms. But that's just my opinion. And my other opinion is that I need a bite of this apple fritter. Thanks for watching, and please take care of yourselves. A detective then asked Michele why she thought the police were at her parents' house. Her response? It's not Joe's fault. It's all my fault. On December 24th, 2007, Wayne and Judy were awaiting the arrival of their children and grandchildren for their fun Christmas Eve festivities. Everyone was getting ready except their one daughter, Mary, who didn't feel well, so she decided to stay back. Good move, Mary. But what was to come for the Anderson family wasn't so holly or jolly. At around 5 p.m. that night, police dispatchers received a gut-wrenching 911 call. It was the sound of indistinct arguing followed by a female screaming, "Not the kids." And then silence. The phone died and the call was dropped. Talk about a cliffhanger! Dispatchers were concerned, so they sent police to the location of the call to check things out. It was the Andersons' house. When the officers arrived, the gate to the Andersons' property was locked, so they decided to leave. Don't you think they'd look into things more after the screaming 911 call ended so abruptly? Just a thought. But nothing happened until 8 a.m. on December 28th when Linda, Judy's co-worker, stopped by the Andersons' house. Linda went to check on Judy because she hadn't shown up for work that day. The gate was locked, but Linda went around it. Gee, if only the cops had thought of that. Linda then knocked on the front door. No one answered. She noticed the door was unlocked, which is weird because Judy always kept her door locked. But Linda entered the house looking for Judy. Then she found a man lying on the floor motionless. It was Scott. Upon first glance, Linda assumed it was carbon monoxide poisoning, but after taking a closer look, she noticed a bullet wound. Then she saw a woman and a child on the floor near Scott's body. Linda first thought the female was Judy, but it was actually Scott's wife, Erica, and the child was their 3-year-old son. So at this point, Linda is freaking out, and she calls 911 to report the crime. While on the phone with the operator, Linda told him that Judy and Wayne's one daughter, Michele, lived in a double wide on her parents' property and was in a feud with them over money. Linda thought she might have something to do with the tragedy. The police arrived at the Andersons' house at 9:30 that morning. This time, they made it past the gate. Hallelujah! They identified the 3 individuals as Scott, Erica, and their son. Upon closer investigation, officers found the 5-year-old daughter hidden behind her mother. The officers continued to sweep the area and discovered Judy and Wayne knocked out in this shed. About 3 hours later, Michele pulled up to her parents' house with her boyfriend. Michele didn't seem to care that the cops were there. She didn't even ask if her parents were okay. Detectives then questioned Michele, and she said the last time she saw her parents was on Christmas Eve. She was supposedly on her way to Vegas with her boyfriend to get hitched, but claimed they turned around because they had gotten lost. It's like she's never heard of a map? A detective then asked Michele why she thought the police were at her parents' house. Her response? It's not Joe's fault. It's all my fault. She then went on to confess that she was responsible for taking out her whole family with bullets. Well, minus Mary. Talk about a quick confession. I haven't even gotten baking the cookies yet. Officials went on to ask Michele more details about the event. She told them she was tired of being walked all over by her family. Her brother apparently owed her $40,000 and he had yet to pay her back. Her parents were pestering her about paying rent for living on their property. Seems like Michele is overreacting a bit. Like, did she not try to have a civilized conversation with them before resorting to violence? Michele confessed that she planned the event for 2 weeks and had her boyfriend help. Here's how it went down. Her parents were preparing for everyone to arrive for their Christmas festivities. Judy was wrapping presents, Wayne was sitting on the couch watching TV. Michele and her boyfriend came over. They both had Glocks. Well, that escalated quickly. Michele's boyfriend distracted Judy while she aimed for her father, Wayne. Her handheld jammed up, so Michele's boyfriend ended up taking out her parents. They moved Wayne and Judy to the shed and cleaned up the house. Scott, Erica, and their 2 kids arrived. Michele fired at Scott, taking him out. Michele and her boyfriend fire at Erica, but they run out of ammunition. During this time, an injured Erica jumps over the couch, grabs the phone, and calls 911. This is a screaming phone call from earlier. Michele's boyfriend grabs the phone from Erica, takes out the batteries, and smashes it against the wall. When Michele realized Erica's 911 call went through, she went out to lock the gate. Then her boyfriend aimed for Erica, takes her out, and Michele instructs her boyfriend to go for Scott and Erica's kids. She told officials that they had to knock out the kids because they didn't want any witnesses, and the kids would be scarred for life from seeing their parents' gruesome exit. Wow, Michele is one tough cookie, and not in a good way. Later in her questioning, Michele led investigators to find the weapons in a nearby river. On December 28th, Michele and her boyfriend were arrested for taking out all 6 family members. They both confessed. The trial process for Michele and her boyfriend was longer than cookies are sweet. The boyfriend went to trial in 2015, 8 years after the initial incident. And I thought the DMV was slow. Damn. He claimed Michele manipulated him into participating, but was found guilty and charged for life without the possibility of parole. Michele went to trial in 2016. She also received a life sentence without an opportunity for parole. Let's recap. Boy meets girl, they fall in love and have kids. Their kids have kids, and they plan a cheerful holiday celebration. Their oldest daughter ditches them because she doesn't feel well, smart move, and their younger gold-digging daughter shows up with her boyfriend with weapons, and they take out the whole family, including her parents, her brother, his wife, and their 2 kids. The end. Whew. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm gonna need a more lighthearted story before I go to bed. And I'm also gonna need some oat milk for these cookies.
So over 700 people see a strange UFO-like object floating in the sky. The government refuses to investigate it, and one councilwoman is even tormented for trying to get down to the bottom of it. The event isn't publicized until months later and is addressed as a supposed UFO sighting. But at that point, is it even a supposed sighting? If 700 people saw it, I'd say it was legit. I mean, I'm sure news stations were trying to keep everyone calm by trying to brush it off. Or were they trying to hide something? Let's find out. So this UFO watching shindig happened on March 13th, 1997, which was a Thursday, but I was hoping it would be on Friday because the idea of this happening on Friday the 13th is a little bit more eerie. Anyway, at around 7, a guy from Henderson, Nevada was the first person who supposedly saw this V-shaped object in the sky. And I know Henderson isn't Phoenix, but most of the sightings were in Phoenix, so that's where the name comes from. Okay, so the dude sees a weird thing in the sky. He said it looked as big as a plane and it sounded like rushing wind. Am I missing something, or is the guy literally just describing a plane? He also reported seeing 6 lights on the edge of this mysterious flying object and mentioned they were traveling from the northwest to the southeast. 20 minutes later, a retired cop from Paulden, Arizona, which again isn't Phoenix, but it's nearby, so said he saw a cluster of mysterious lights in the sky. He was the first one who actually called about the sightings, even though Mr. Henderson, Nevada said he was the first one to see it. I bet the retired cop was the first one to call him because he probably just wanted to talk to his old friends at the station. Like, I love bugging my old coworkers. You know how that goes. I mean, there's just something about going to an old job and being able to talk to your old coworkers. I've been there. So the retired cop claimed to have seen 5 lights in total, 4 in line with each other and a 5th trailing behind. He said they looked orange or reddish. Well, after Mr. X-Cop called in about the weird lights, everyone and their mother started making calls to the National UFO Reporting Center about the same thing. Okay, seriously, how am I just now finding out that we have a National UFO Reporting Center? Why is that, like, not more public? And how do I apply to work there? Because that seems like such a fun job to have. So everyone who was calling about the weird orbs in the sky at first were from the Paulden area. At this point, I'm second guessing why they're called the Phoenix Lights. Like, can we just say general Arizona, Nevada area lights to cover all the bases? Or whatever you want to call this event, the people who were making reports all gave various descriptions of what they actually saw. They were all along the lines of eerie lights making up a V shape in the sky that were heading southwest. And most people said the mysterious lights made up one big floating craft that moved slowly and made no sound whatsoever. That is interesting. Because if it were a plane, they definitely would have heard it. So then what's something big that could be slowly floating in the sky without making any noise? Oh, and I forgot to mention that these weren't just random superstitious strangers who were calling the UFO reporting center. A lot of them were pilots, police officers, and military personnel. So these people, they knew their shit. Well, finally, someone from Phoenix reported the floating craft. Hallelujah! I was just about to lose my cool as someone from Phoenix didn't come up in the story soon. It's like when someone puts LA in their Instagram bio when they actually live 30 miles away in Pomona. Stop lying, sis. You don't live in LA. So a Phoenix-based couple and their grandson reported seeing the lights. They first thought it was a balloon, but as it got closer, they noticed the same V shape everyone else saw. Come on, Phoenix people, you're late to the UFO sighting party. Like, we've already known this already. Seriously, the threesome? The 3 of them said that they first saw it at a distance, but as time passed, the floating craft looked like it was coming right down their street. They said it was hovering a little over 100 feet above them and wasn't making any noise. 100 feet? That's like super close. I can't decide if I'd be packing up my shit and fleeing or if I'd stand out there and try to get abducted by aliens, because I'll be honest, a vacation does sound pretty nice right now, especially outside of the US. As more time passed, the group said that the object passed over them and disappeared in the mountains. Alright, so there were actually 2 different mysterious light sightings from that night. The first happened at about 7 and was of 5 V-shaped lights that were hovering in the sky and moving. The second happened around 10 and was a group of 5 to 9 lights that were hovering in the sky in one specific spot right above Phoenix. The lights were seen blinking on and off at random times, and not all at once. In both occurrences, the majority of people said they couldn't actually see the object if the lights were attached to, but they said you could see the outline of it. That's eerie. So witnesses also mentioned the lights were kind of blurry, almost like they were kind of like gas of some sort. Some said the string of orbs were V-shaped. Others said that they were shaped kind of like a boomerang. And one girl compared them to a mall floating over her house. Yeah, literally a shopping mall. Out of everything in the world you could compare something to, you choose a mall? It's a weird flex. We get that you shop, but okay. So even though most people thought it was one object, others thought the lights themselves were individually floating entities. So one truck driver from Phoenix said he saw 2 top-shaped orbs surrounded by red rings of lights floating in the sky by the nearby Air Force Base. Then 3 jets took off from the base, and one of the orbs looked like it was chasing after one of the jets until it shot up into the sky and disappeared. I really want to believe this guy, but his story is a bit different from all the others. It's also pretty out there, and since the guy's a truck driver, that means he spends long hours driving alone, so I'm sure he's a little sleep deprived and also lonely. But wait until you hear what he told interviewers about his experience. He said, "I'll never be the same. Before this, if anybody had told me they saw a UFO, I would have said, yeah, and I believe in the Tooth Fairy. Now I've got a whole new view, and I may be just a dumb truck driver, but I've seen something that doesn't belong here." Okay, so is it weird that I think I love this man and like I want to be his friend? Like, he's funny, he's charming, and he's honest. I mean, what more could you really ask for from a friend? So a few days after the sightings, air traffic controllers at the Phoenix airport So a few days after the sightings, air traffic controllers at the Phoenix airport told reporters and UFO investigators that there was nothing on their radar that night. That's crazy. Like, I wonder if any planes flying over the area saw anything. People from one of the Air Force bases in the area said that there were no military aircraft sent up that night. But 2 months later, their story changed and they said this person working that night didn't look at the correct logbook. And it took them 2 months to figure that out? I mean, that seems suspicious to me. Like, whatever was in the sky that night, a lot of people saw it, and a lot of people recorded it too. All of the known pictures and videos are from the second sighting, where the lights were hovering above Phoenix. In the videos, you can clearly see the strange orbs that people had been describing, but none of them were taken using equipment for scientific analysis, so it's kind of hard to tell much on a technical level. I bet it was a bunch of middle-aged dads in light-washed jeans and white New Balances with their camcorders. Like, this was probably the most exciting thing for suburban Arizonians. One UFO researcher claimed that he performed a spectral analysis of the pictures and videos from that night and concluded that the lights were not from a man-made source. But several sources pointed out that it is impossible to determine that information from the footage people took. Basically, regular cameras get rid of all the light outside of the visible spectrum, and in order to do a spectral analysis, you need all the lights from the full spectrum. Oh my god, and the dude who made the software that the UFO researcher supposedly used even admitted that his platform isn't capable of determining something like that. Wait, isn't this so funny and also so tragic? Like, this poor UFO superfan is just trying to get other people on board with his passion, but he missed the mark. Like, that had to be so embarrassing that the guy who literally made the program that the UFO dude used was like, nah, my app can't do that. Videos and pictures of the lights hit a few news stations days after the event, but there really wasn't much coverage on this phenomenon until later. That's super sketchy to me. Like, it's one of the craziest things to ever happen in that area and no one is covering it in the news. It makes me really wonder what's really going on. Were they trying to play both sides and not admit to believing in UFOs and aliens, or were they trying to cover up something for the government? Speaking of the government, a Phoenix councilwoman apparently brought up the mysterious lights at a meeting and asked if anyone knew what it was and if there was going to be an investigation. They brushed off her question and continued on with other topics. After the meeting, the councilwoman said that a city manager went up to her and told her, "You shouldn't have asked that question." Thanks, but did she ask for your feedback? I don't think so. Like, let the woman speak for herself. Like, damn, like, oh my god, wait. Please tell me she pulled a Kamala and said, "Let me finish." Oh, and after this whole situation where these city officials tried to silence these councilwomen, an Arizona newspaper literally published a cartoon making fun of her. The cartoon was a drawing of her wearing a button that said, "I love UFOs." She was also harassed and teased at work about the whole thing. I'm sorry, but what the hell is wrong with these people? This woman literally brought up a hot topic in the city that was being ignored, and they just turn around and bully her? It's stories like this that make me realize how much work we still have to do as a society. So the Phoenix Lights phenomenon wasn't really covered in the news until June, when USA Today published a huge cover spread about the event. Once that came out, the whole country got word about the crazy occurrence and just about lost it. Some people were convinced it was aliens. Others believed it must have been military flares. And some thought they were just weather balloons. Oh, Seriously, if Facebook was around during this time, I can't even imagine what the comment section would be like. Like that's something that I would want to read. Anyway, people across the country started following the story and demanded answers. The Arizona governor held a press conference to address the situation. He said he knew what was responsible and told them to come out for everyone to look at. Then someone dressed up as an alien stepped up on stage. Yeah, he literally had someone come out in an alien costume during a press conference. I'm shook over this. Like a government official came out on live television to mock an event that people are actually really freaked out about. That sounds familiar. The crazy part about all of this is that 10 years later, the same guy who brought out a fake alien actually admitted to seeing the lights firsthand and said he saw a UFO. First of all, how did he switch from making fun of UFOs and aliens in a televised press conference to saying he believed in them 100%? And why did it take him 10 years to come up with that? Maybe he wasn't getting as much attention as he used to and wanted some extra clout. So the official explanation that was given about the lights that night is that the Air Force was doing a training exercise where they dropped military flares, which is what they said the people were seeing. Okay, then why did people never mention seeing weird lights every time they dropped flares? Like, why did these flares, in particular, make over 700 people call about a possible UFO sighting? One of the pilots described the formation by saying the flares go where the wind blows. Okay, so the wind blew these flares into a perfect V formation? Interesting. Oh, and don't forget the Air Force Base that supposedly hosted the exercise initially reported that there were no aircraft out at the time and changed their statement 2 months later. So the plane that apparently dropped the flares that night wasn't even in the air until about 10 p.m. So that wouldn't explain the first sightings at 7 p.m. The only explanation people have for the first sighting is that some random guy said he was looking through a telescope at the first set of lights and saw aircrafts in the sky. But literally no one else reported seeing anything like that, and even the Air Force Base didn't make up that they had planes in the sky at that time either. So that's weird. So it seems like the Air Force tried to cover up the whole thing, but then something leaked. That's scandalous. The morning after the incident, one of their airmen came forward with a wild story. He said that they got a call at 8:32 that night reporting a mass in the air that almost hit an aircraft. Oh my god, wait, is that what my trucker friend saw? They apparently sent 2 planes to check out what was going on, and when the planes returned, one of the pilots looked sheepish. When people asked the pilot what he saw, he said there was a mysterious floating object that had 5 lights and a V pattern. Okay, so he saw exactly what all 700 other people saw. And I'm not sure what ended up happening to the anonymous airman who reported this, but the Air Force denied the statement, so I'm gonna take a shot in the dark here and say that the dude probably got fired and blacklisted. So the whole military flare thing is literally the explanation they've stuck with all these years, and it isn't the only time strange V-shaped lights have been seen in the sky. Apparently some people saw the same UFO-like object days before the big sighting, and in Belgium there are multiple reports almost identical to this story where people saw the same thing in the sky. Those sightings were 7 years before this one. Well, all the signs are pointing to the aliens, and it seems like the government just keeps trying to cover it up. And not just by making up a story about the Air Force. No, the government actually created a secretive program for advanced aerospace threat identification. What is it with all these UFO organizations I never know about? Well, this specific government-funded initiative was created in 2002. They poured millions of dollars into researching unidentified flying objects until the program was shut down in 2007. But the government didn't release this information until 2017. That's 10 years later. So they must be hiding something. But what or who? Well, thanks to this story, I think I now have a crush on a random truck driver, and I want to quit my job so I can go work at a National UFO Reporting Center. I'm gonna eat this tiramisu, but before I do, don't forget to keep an eye out for those weird lights floating in the sky. This story had a lot of layers, just like this tiramisu.
When a police officer pulled over a young man for speeding, all signs pointed to this being a case of a dangerous driver under the influence of drugs. The officer may have been correct in his initial assumption, but he quickly realized that he was dealing with something far more serious. This was not just a traffic violation. This was the aftermath of a brutal murder. It's late afternoon, July 2020. A police officer has spotted this black Chevrolet Camaro doing outrageous speeds along the Louisiana highway. The car is moving at over 20 miles an hour above the speed limit. The state trooper acts quickly, pulls the car over, and because the tint on the car's window is so dark, he gestures for the driver to exit the vehicle. After a polite exchange, the driver admits to not having a driver's license. Once the state trooper accompanies the young man back to the Camaro, the smell of hits the officer's nose. He questions the young driver as to whether or not there are any drugs inside the vehicle. Perhaps surprisingly, this 18-year-old man admits that there is marijuana inside the car. This man is now in serious trouble. At this point, though, the Louisiana State Trooper has no idea just how quickly this situation will soon escalate. Before the cop has even searched the vehicle, this young man is likely going to spend some time in jail. Despite the driver of the Camaro being honest and open about his recent drug use, his behavior grows increasingly concerning, and he has trouble truthfully answering simple questions about his address, where he's going to, and where he is coming from. For the police officer, this is enough to raise his suspicions and have him on high alert. It's time for the officer to search the vehicle. In another surprising moment of cooperation, the young man agrees to have his car searched without hesitation. The Louisiana State Trooper is now looking for more drugs, weapons, or any other incriminating evidence inside the car. Bullet holes are scattered across the left side of the Camaro. There's no telling when this car was shot up, but the bullet holes do tell the cop that there is almost certainly something more sinister going on here. This only becomes more obvious as the driver is unable to accurately explain how or when the bullet holes were made on the car. The officer now has to uncover the truth about what is really going on. The driver of the vehicle is identified as Michael Mitchell Jr., but the black Camaro is revealed to be registered under the name Chandra Henderson. With the GPS active in the Camaro, Mitchell's inability to confirm where he is heading or where he even lives, it seems that not even Mitchell himself knew where was going before the officer pulled him over. The lies are piling up, but just as it appears as though the officer is about to put an end to Mitchell's habit of telling tall tales, another car pulls up at the scene. This man claims to have been sent out searching for the black Camaro and its driver, though it soon becomes clear that Michael Mitchell is not the person he's looking for. At this point, it's reasonable to assume that Michael Mitchell is driving a stolen car, because the car actually belongs to the mother of the missing person that the man who pulled up behind police is looking for. The missing person is 23-year-old Michael Robinson. A more thorough search leads the Louisiana State Trooper to the trunk of the car, and it is here that he makes a horrifying discovery. Inside the trunk of the black Camaro lies Michael Robinson, dead. Michael Mitchell Jr. is promptly arrested. Even with Robinson's body found, and with Mitchell in handcuffs, there are still plenty of unanswered questions surrounding this case. During interrogation, Mitchell reveals his version of what happened to Michael Robinson. Mitchell admits to knowing Michael Robinson on a personal level, even going as far as to call him a friend. He admits to being part of a plan to steal money from Robinson, but he also claims that he is not the one who shot and killed the 23-year-old. Mitchell points the finger at another young man by the name of Cameron Powell. He claims that Cameron Powell had been responsible for the shooting, specifically that Powell was the one who pulled the trigger while Mitchell watched on. Mitchell also claims that the site where he was headed on the day of his arrest, the place where Mitchell was intending to dump the body of Michael Robinson, was a location suggested by Cameron Powell. Mitchell goes on to state that Powell had told him when and where to dispose of the body. Cameron Powell was charged with second-degree murder, though as doubts were raised surrounding Mitchell's claims of Powell's involvement, Mitchell retracted his statements implicating Powell and admitted to shooting and killing Michael Robinson. Through a teary-eyed confession, Mitchell revealed that he had been hanging out and smoking with Robinson at an apartment prior to the incident. After spending some time together, the pair left the apartment block in the black Camaro. Michael Robinson allegedly became aggressive while driving. When Robinson pulled over, Mitchell exited the car. Mitchell claimed he was ready to say his goodbyes, but Michael Robinson pulled a gun on him. In a moment of panic, Mitchell pulled a gun of his own and then fired at Robinson until there were no bullets remaining in his gun. This is how Robinson was killed, and how the black Chevrolet Camaro ended up with multiple bullet holes on its left-hand side. Cameron Powell was not involved in Michael Robinson's death. When asked why he had attempted to blame Powell for the crime, Mitchell revealed that Cameron Powell had previously robbed him at gunpoint, and revenge had been on Mitchell's mind when he attempted to pin the murder on Powell. The charges against Cameron Powell were subsequently dropped. Michael Mitchell Jr. reportedly then took a plea deal. For the brutal, senseless killing of Michael Robinson, Mitchell was sentenced to 25 years of hard labor in prison. He will be 45 years old by the time his sentence is up. For the family of Michael Robinson, justice has been served thanks to the swift actions of a brave Louisiana state trooper. Michael Robinson's cousin, Adrian Harris, called the incident and the aftermath a lose-lose situation, and said that while dealing with Robinson's death was difficult for his entire family, they could find peace, knowing that he is now in a better place. In a cruel twist of fate, Robinson had been murdered just as he was planning to join the police force. Harris revealed his cousin's plans for the near future in an interview. He was planning on becoming a state trooper. He already had his application. He was getting ready to submit this week, and he was looking to move and get an apartment in Dallas and start his life there. Adrian Harris Michael Robinson was just 23 years old at the time of his death. Was Robinson's death an altercation between friends turned deadly? Or had Mitchell planned the murder with Michael Robinson's money as his motivation? Whatever the reasons behind this heinous crime, Michael Mitchell's seemingly cold, calm manner when being stopped by police remains a chilling reminder that the truth is never as obvious as it may seem.
A 25-year-old girl was found floating face down in kelp at a beach in San Diego, and she was in rough shape. Not only was she missing her clothes, but she was also missing her right leg, and that's not an expression. Her leg was literally gone from the thigh down. She had several broken bones and her whole body was super mutilated. On the surface, it seemed like a tragic shark accident, but as officials continued to investigate, things started to get a bit fishy and they suspected foul play. Michele Von Emster was a 25-year-old NorCal native who loved the beach, complete with a butterfly tattoo on her shoulder. She went on to college, but was tragically diagnosed with cancer and dropped out. A year later, Michele beat her cancer to only find herself in another life-threatening scenario, which didn't end well this time. But before that happened, Michele moved in the Ocean Beach neighborhood, which had a bit of a bad rap, but Michele and her roommate Coco didn't mind. Well, on April 14th, 1994, Michele and Coco had plans to go to a Pink Floyd concert. But when they showed up at the venue that night, they found out that they bought the wrong ticket, so they literally had to turn around and leave. Oh my God, I would be so pissed if I had to turn away from a freaking Pink Floyd concert because I bought the wrong tickets. You know, I wouldn't want that whole thing to happen to anybody. So Michele and Coco turned around and started driving back to their houses in Ocean Beach. That was probably such a sad car ride. Like, I wonder if they played Pink Floyd to make it feel like they were still at the concert or if they sat in silence or something. But before they made it home, Michele asked Coco to drop her off at the pier, which was about 6 blocks away from their place. Coco dropped Michele off at around 8 p.m., which is the last time she was seen alive. Michele was wearing a green trench coat and had a purse when Coco dropped her off. That next morning, 2 surfers were at the beach when they saw a bunch of seagulls swarming a certain area and decided to check out the sitch. Well, it turns out that the seagulls weren't swarming a random bag of chips or scraps of food. They were surrounding the body of a married young woman who was floating in the kelp with some pretty gnarly injuries. The woman who was eventually identified as Michele, and she was identified by her butterfly tattoo, which was super torn up. Her clothes were missing, and part of her right leg, oh my God, like, I bet you that the surfers were so sick to their stomach after seeing all that, I know that I would be. Officials first said the cause of Michele's big adios was unknown, but they were pretty certain it was a shark attack. Yeah, a woman washing up on the beach with a missing leg seems like a shark attack to me. A medical examiner then performed an autopsy and found that Michele had a broken neck, her pelvis, a few ribs, she was covered in scratches, and was missing her right leg, and even had sand in her mouth, throat, lungs, and her stomach, which meant she was alive during all of this. Oh, and I can't tell what's worse, the fact that Michele suffered from all these horrific injuries, or the fact that she had all this sand in her mouth the whole time. Ew. So Michelle's fatality was deemed an accident. The medical examiner believes she jumped in the water at around midnight before getting attacked by a great white shark and falling to the bottom of the ocean, which is where she then broke her neck, got a bunch of sand in her mouth, and officially lost her life due to drowning and loss of bodily fluid. But things get even more weird. Michele had some post-mortem injuries that the examiner said must have been from smaller blue sharks who fed on the girl after she kicked the bucket. I think that's so odd. Like, why would one shark first attack Michele and then another group of sharks that are a different breed go and nibble on her? Like, don't they have like shark code or something? Also, how did she break her neck somewhere in the middle of all of that? But when other examiners and shark experts got a look at the pictures of Michele's body, they shut down the shark attack theory so fast. Even though Michele's leg was somehow hacked off and she was found in the water, shark experts say that there was no way that it was by a great white shark. Which seems crazy now, but just wait until you hear the rest. So apparently when a shark bites off someone's limb, it's like a pretty clean cut. Like, they can rip off a leg in one bite. But Michele's leg was super mangled, and they even described that her thigh bone looked like it had been wilted down to a point. Oh, I wonder who would have wanted to push her. Like, that's a pretty bold move to do a random stranger, but maybe it was someone who knew her. And it wasn't really talked about, but I think it could have been the roommate because she was the only one who really knew where Michele was. And there's bound to be drama between roommates. Trust me, I should know. I know what roommate horror stories are. I've had some. One of the other popular theories is that Michele was 86 by a man named Edwin, who she apparently had a thing with. Edwin worked as a bartender right next door to the coffee shop Michele worked at. He told the police that him and Michele had been seeing each other for a few weeks and even hung out with her the day before she disappeared. Then he told him that Michele liked to surf naked. That's a weird thing to say outright, which is why some people think he said to justify the theory that she went out skinny dipping that night as a cover-up for him actually being her Terminator. Here's the best part. After Edwin found out about his potential lover's sticky ending, he published a poem titled Shark Attack that awkwardly described the last time they were romantic and compared it to sharks nibbling on her. And it's cringier than it sounds. Like, he legit wrote, the report said that there was a tattoo, a butterfly on her shoulder, which I remembered that night on my couch when I, like the shark, chewed on her lips and took off her shirt. I am losing it. And dude, now is not the time to compare yourself to the shark that may have attacked your girl, who now I'm second guessing if she really was your girl. Well, even though his odd poem raised some suspicion, Edwin was never connected to the crime. In 2008, he asked the medical examiner to re-review Michele's case, which I'm guessing he wouldn't have done if he really was her liquidator. Okay, so I mentioned this earlier, but Michele lived in an area known for crime and substance abuse. It was often referred to as the war zone. I don't know why anyone would want to live there. Well, Michele didn't have a car and worked a handful of minimum wage jobs, so she probably spent a few nights out late walking in that area. At one of her jobs, Michele told a coworker that she thought she was being stalked by someone, but the only thing she knew about him was that he drove a motorcycle. After this was brought up to the police, they tried to figure out who this motorcycle riding creep was, but they had no luck. I still think it could have been the roommate, especially if Michele was the one who messed up the whole concert ticket thing. And it's crazy to think that if they did have the correct tickets that night, Michele might still be alive. Well, if I have one piece of advice to give you from this story, it's that creepy erotic poems are not the way to pay homage to somebody. Like, if you're sad, maybe just send flowers and make a heartfelt Facebook post or something. Or you could eat crepes. Okay, so imagine spending half of your childhood in jail. Sounds crazy, right? Well, for one 11-year-old boy named Jordan, that was a reality. This kid was arrested and charged for slaying his dad's new fiance, who had recently moved in with her 2 kids from a previous relationship. And she had already been 8 months pregnant with Jordan's first younger half-sibling. The little boy apparently took out his soon-to-be stepmom with his own. Yeah, he had his own weapon at 11. Oh, and did I mention that he was tried in court as an adult? Buckle up, guys, this is a super twisted story. Jordan Brown grew up in the town of Wampum, Pennsylvania. And don't worry if you haven't heard of Wampum, because at a population of 600 people, I'm guessing not many other people knew about it as well. Well, until this story. Jordan was a fun-loving, athletic kid who loved football, baseball, and spending quality time with his dad, Chris. But when his dad rekindled an old flame with 26-year-old Kenzie Hawk, Jordan's home life changed pretty drastically. Chris proposed to Kenzie and asked her to move in with him. She moved into their home with her 2 young daughters that were from a past relationship. So it went from just Jordan and his dad to a family of 5 overnight. It's kind of like the Brady Bunch, but way more tense and tragic of an ending. So I guess it's not really like the Brady Bunch and all of that. Anyway, that must have been a lot for Jordan to deal with. Like 2 new sisters in a matter of minutes, and he probably lost a lot of his dad's attention too. Well, Kenzie and Chris were already expecting their first child together, and at the time of the event, Kenzie was already 8 months pregnant. The couple was super excited to welcome their new baby. The nursery was ready, the hospital bag was packed, and they even had a name picked out. Oh, it's so cute. Jordan said that he was excited about getting a new sibling, but what happened next seems to contradict that. I mean, I'm sure he was sad and frustrated about this whole situation. His dad is about to marry a new woman, and they're already having a baby together? Now that he's no longer the apple of his dad's eye, and is about to have to put up with an annoying little brother, Jordan had to be a bit angry. I know that I would be. Like, I'm an only child, and I always hated sharing with my friends. I can't even imagine sharing with another sibling. All right, enough about me. Let's get back to the Jordan story. So everything for the wannabe Brady Bunch seemed pretty normal until the morning of February 20th, 2009. Chris got up for work a bit late that morning. Kenzie actually asked him to stay home from work, but he decided to go in. He's got to make that dough. Kids ain't cheap. After her fiance left, Kenzie fell back asleep. When Jordan and his little stepsister Janessa woke up to get ready for school, Jordan was staying in his bedroom upstairs, but when the new baby arrived, he was going to switch room with his dad and stepmom so they could be closer to the nursery. Oh, so that's another point of tension. He's already having to deal with his dad's new woman, 2 new stepsisters, a younger brother on the way, and he has to give up his room. Damn! Again, being an only child, I wouldn't want to share stuff anyway. So since Jordan was about to swap rooms with Kenzie, his stuff was already in her current room downstairs. That morning, he supposedly went into her room while she was asleep to pick out his clothes for the day. Once Jordan and Janessa were both ready for school, they sat on the couch until they left to catch the bus. At around 8:15 that morning, the kids went out the back door, ran down the driveway, and got on the bus for school. 45 minutes later, landscapers arrived to work on the house. One of the landscapers saw Kenzie's 4-year-old daughter crying. He asked her what was wrong, and she told him that her mom was lying motionless in bed. So the landscaper, who was probably losing his shit at this point, called 911. I wonder what was going through the landscaper's head. Like, if a woman is found 86 in her bed, and the only people around are a group of adult tree trimmers and one 4-year-old child, more than likely, most people would think that one of the adults did it. When the police officers first arrived at the scene, they thought that Kenzie hemorrhaged and passed away. But when they began taking photos of her body, coroners found a bullet wound in the back of her head. They performed CPR, but it was too late. Kenzie and her unborn baby were both declared lifeless. Officers then called Chris and told him to come home immediately. Once he got there, the officers had to break the news that his soon-to-be wife and baby mama had been taken out. Gosh, that must have been so rough. And it's so tragic to think that he almost was gonna stay home that day. After that, Chris went to the police station to be interviewed. He voluntarily gave a statement about his accounts of events. He said he gave Kenzie a kiss and then left for work that morning. His story was confirmed, and Chris was cleared as a suspect. I mean, it's super sad to me that even though Chris is going through a heartbreaking loss, he's still suspected as a suspect. But after all those other crazy stories that I've heard, you never know who's really capable of doing something like that. The next thing officers do is head to the elementary school to talk to Jordan and Janessa. They asked both kids what happened that morning. Janessa said it was an average morning and didn't mention anything out of the ordinary. Jordan said everything was fairly normal, but he did mention a mysterious black truck parked outside by the garage. After their questioning, Jordan and Janessa were sent home. At 3:30 the very next morning, cops came pounding on Chris and Jordan's door. They had a warrant for Jordan's arrest. Jordan, the 11-year-old boy, I'm shook. This boy is literally in the 5th grade and just got pinned for taking his almost stepmom's life. When I was in 5th grade, all I was worried about was kickball and growing up. That's all I was worried about, not this stuff. So the cops grabbed Jordan and put him in the back of the patrol car and drove him to the county jail. Okay, but just think about what's going on in Chris's head. This guy just found out that his fiance and unborn child kicked the bucket, and now his 11-year-old son just got arrested for doing it? That's a lot. So how did this football-loving elementary schooler get pinned to the crime? And why did the officers just now take action at 3:30 in the morning? So Kenzie's autopsy revealed the first clue, a single blow to the head from a 20 gauge. The reason that this specific choice is weird is because large weapons like that aren't typically used in crimes committed by random intruders. Like, just think about it. Running down the driveway trying to sneak into someone's house with a 3-foot musket, it just doesn't really happen. Here's the second clue. During their search of the house, investigators found several weapons. Most of them belonged to Chris and were used for hunting. One of them was a kid-sized firearm that was given to Jordan by his father 1 year for Christmas. Okay, first of all, it's crazy that Jordan had his own firearm at 11 years old, but can we talk about the fact that these companies literally make child-sized weapons? That's whack. I mean, what happened to kids getting video games and toys for Christmas? That's all I got when I was a kid. So officers performed a sniff test, which is just a fancy way of saying they took a whiff of the firearm barrel. They noted that Jordan's weapon smelled like it had recently been fired. The bullet size and type also matched Kenzie's wound. Although there was no bodily fluid or tissue on the rifle, investigators were certain that this was the weapon used on Kenzie. They also found 3 20-gauge bullet casings in the driveway of the house. The bullet casing matched Jordan's weapon and were right along the path he took to get on the bus. In one of Jordan's interviews, he said that he threw out some lint that was in his pocket on the walk to the bus, but investigators theorized that lint was actually a handful of bullet shells. Okay, so let's jump over to Jordan, who just got arrested and brought to an adult jail. He's brought in for a second round of questioning. This time his story is a bit different. He tells investigators that not only was there a sketchy black truck parked outside of their house, but there was a man ducking down in the truck with a hat on. Why would he leave that part off during the first round of questioning? And why did Janessa never mention seeing this truck? Well, when Janessa is interviewed for the second time, she spills the tea. Oh, she spills it, hunty. Oh, and she spills it, all right. She said that she saw Jordan moving his weapons that morning. Ah, yes. Like, let me get dressed for school. Something for breakfast, and maybe, I don't know, shuffle around my hunting rifles around. Janessa also said when she was waiting for Jordan to finish getting ready, she heard a loud noise. Maybe the sound of a bullet firing? Yo, so why did Janessa also leave all of this out in her first interview? Those 2 bits of information seem pretty important to the case. I wonder if Jordan talked about it with her or threatened her not to tell. Ooh. Time to keep a secret. I know that I would not be able to do anything like that. So with this information, police felt confident that Jordan was the criminal. And remember how much was going on for this little boy? Police believed he had a sufficient motive to do away with his soon-to-be stepmom. Jordan was first charged for the crime as an adult, but his lawyers ended up getting the case moved to juvenile court. Oh, and when he was initially arrested, Jordan was held in an adult jail. I don't even know how to feel at this point. It's like, I want to be mad at this kid for being the possible suspect for such a horrendous crime, but also I want to feel bad for him because he was almost tried as an adult and having to stay in adult jail at age 11. Well, Jordan was eventually found guilty for the crime and served in a juvenile prison until he was 19. After that, he was released on probation until he turned 21. During this whole time, Jordan's lawyers were filing appeals to get his convictions overturned. Jordan never actually admitted to the crime, and his lawyers didn't believe there was enough solid evidence that tied Jordan to the case. Yeah, investigators thought that Jordan pinned for the weapon and a viable motive, but they couldn't prove that that was the specific firearm used. It also didn't have any DNA evidence on it, and the police didn't even dust for fingerprints on the door to the house to see if there actually could have been an intruder that day. Oh, I mean, that seems a bit sketch that the police went out of their way to dust the little kid's rifle for fingerprints, but not the front door? Like, how did they miss that? So all this time, Jordan's lawyers were trying to get his conviction overturned, but it wasn't until 3 years later when the Pennsylvania Supreme Court would hear his appeal. The Supreme Court ended up overturning Jordan's conviction due to a lack of sufficient evidence. But at that point, he was already out of jail. Damn. If Jordan really isn't the marksman, he just served years in prison and a lifetime of trauma for nothing. Also, I can't get over the fact that his case made it all the way up to the Supreme Court. Like, you know, it must have been a really tough one for everyone to decide if it made it that far. So since Jordan's conviction was overturned, who's responsible for finishing off Kenzie? That is still unknown to this day. The only other suspect on officials' radar is one of Kenzie's ex-boyfriends, who she previously filed a restraining order against for threats of violence. I'm so confused by this whole story. Was the 11-year-old boy jealous enough of his almost stepmom to knock her out? I mean, his life was drastically changed by his father's new relationship. But would that lead him to go upstairs one morning before school, grab his hunting rifle, go back downstairs to grab bullets, fire at Kenzie in the back of the head, go back upstairs, wipe the weapon clean of any physical evidence, put it back where it was, and toss the shells in the driveway on his way to school? That's a lot. But if it wasn't him, why was he arranging his rifles that morning? Why were there bullet casings on the path to the bus? Why didn't Janessa see the black van? I have so many questions, and it seems like no one has the answers. So it looks like there's only one solution to all of this. Grilled cheese and tomato soup.
The Uber driver was later brought in for questioning and said he never picked Carla up. So where did Carla go? Carla Stefaniak was a model, fashion blogger, photographer, and avid Instagrammer from Miami, Florida. On November 22nd, 2018, Carla took a vacation to Costa Rica to celebrate her 36th birthday with her sister-in-law, April. Carla reportedly posted a lot of photos and videos on social media while on the trip. April had to leave one day early, but Carla decided to stay an extra day so she could spend her birthday in Costa Rica. Or get snatched up. Wait, I'm getting ahead of myself. On November 27th, Carla took April to the San Jose airport. After dropping off April, Carla returned their rental car and got an Uber back to the villa she was staying at. Weird flex, but okay. Carla agreed. At around 5 p.m. that night, Carla's Uber driver drove her back to the villa. They arranged for him to pick her up the next morning to take her to the airport. Throughout the whole day, Carla was in touch with April. She mentioned in a conversation with April that it was raining very hard in Costa Rica. Moments later, the power went out. Carla told her sister-in-law, "It's pretty sketchy in here." Uh-oh. At midnight, April texted Carla to wish her a happy birthday. She didn't respond. Seems a bit odd for someone who's always scrolling through Instagram, right? Her family thought the same thing too. That morning, April still hadn't heard from Carla. While still worried, she first assumed Carla was busy getting to the airport for her flight back to Miami. Until one of Carla's friends called April. She told her Carla hadn't responded to her birthday messages and was concerned. Carla's family noticed that she apparently checked in for her flight from her phone, but never made it to the airport or boarded the plane. Her family then called the police to report her missing. They believed she was kidnapped. Carla's dad, brother, and friend all flew to Costa Rica to search for her. So what happened that morning? Bismarck, the security officer who was working at the villa the morning of Carla's disappearance, said she had gotten in a gray car with her luggage at 5 a.m. Carla's family didn't believe she would leave for the airport that early, since her flight wasn't until 1 p.m. There were also no charges on her credit card for an Uber, or anything for that matter. At 8:30 a.m., an Uber driver showed up to take Carla to the airport. It was the same driver that showed her around town the previous night. She wasn't there. This took place after a guard shift change, so a new security guard was there. He told the driver that Carla had already left, based on the information passed along from Bismarck. The Uber driver was later brought in for questioning and said he never picked Carla up. So where did Carla go? The last person who reportedly talked to Carla said she mentioned being thirsty and wanted to leave to get water from the security guard. The guard on duty at that time was Bismarck. This was the same guard who was supposedly witnessed Carla get in a car that next morning. Seems a little #sus, don't you think? The FBI joined forces with the Costa Rican police to conduct a thorough investigation of the villa Carla was staying in. At first glance, Carla's room appeared fairly clean. Once they brought in a canine team and forensics crew, that seemed the exact opposite. Kind of like when your room looks clean, but in reality you just kind of shoved everything under the bed or in the closet. Officials found evidence of bodily fluid all over the room that someone attempted to cover up by repeatedly cleaning the areas with bleach and vinegar. The fluid matched Carla's DNA. Whatever happened in her room that night was concluded to be very gruesome. On December 3rd, almost 1 week after Carla's disappearance, a body was found by a search dog. Dang, these police dogs are the real MVPs. It was about 200 yards away from the villa Carla was staying in. The body was covered in plastic bags and partly buried. It was too decomposed to tell much initially, but officials verified it was a woman. After conducting a full autopsy, medical examiners concluded it was Carla. They found 7 puncture wounds and evidence of major trauma to her head. Once the remains were identified, Costa Rican officers detained the villa security guard, Bismarck, as their main suspect. Why? First of all, Bismarck was the last person Carla was planning to see that evening. Remember, she was thirsty and planned to get water from him? And the next day, Bismarck is the only person who sees her get in a car. Interesting concept. None of Bismarck's testimonies matched up either. In February of 2020, Bismarck was found guilty for a second-degree charge and received a 16-year sentence in prison. To this day, no one really knows the details of what happened to Carla. As more evidence is found, some officials believe this was a planned act organized by a group of people, not just Bismarck. Whatever happened to Carla that night was terrible. And on her birthday nonetheless. Honestly, I thought it was gonna be that Uber driver at first. Like, who's that friendly and that helpful? Anyways, cake! Thanks so much for watching, and stay safe, friends.
You guys, I cannot get over how terrifying this story is. So this girl named Sasha does what any thriving 27-year-old would do. She goes out to a bar with some friends, and she returns home drunk and attempts to get into her apartment, but forgot her key and couldn't remember the code to get in. She goes to the security guard for help, but apparently the guy is her stalker and ends up taking her out in her own apartment. Yeah, I wasn't lying when I said this was terrifying. Sasha Samsudean was a 27-year-old woman living by herself in a luxury apartment complex in Orlando, Florida. So the night of October 16, 2015, 27-year-old Sasha went out to the attic bar with some friends. Sasha left the club at around 12:30 a.m. She was intoxicated. 2 of her friends helped her get home after finding her drunk by herself at the club. They watched her enter the apartment complex before leaving. Sasha had breakfast plans with her friends the very next day. So now Sasha's friends are starting to worry. Later that day, Sasha's friends couldn't get in touch with her. Sasha was known for being on social media all the time and typically responded to text and phone calls, so this was a little concerning for her friends. They went to her apartment and knocked on her door. No one answered. At around 8 p.m. on October 17th, Sasha's friends contacted the police and reported her as missing. The police were sent to Sasha's apartment for a welfare check. They opened her apartment door and found her lifeless body on her bed. She was wrapped up in a comforter. Her shirt had been taken off. The necklace she was wearing that night was taken off and tangled in her hair. There were marks on her neck. A bleach-smelling cleaning product was poured all over her parts of her body. Despite the bad cleanup job, foreign DNA was found and collected from her body. When investigators searched around for more evidence, they found a rubber, a shoe print, a fingerprint on the nightstand, and a fingerprint on the toilet seat. Man, this guy was touching up all over the place. Officials also noted that the toilet seat was lifted, which seemed odd for a girl living by herself. Now, investigators concluded that the perpetrator was most likely a male. Like I said, anyone who lives up a toilet seat is probably a male. There were also no signs of forced entry. Whoever committed the crime must have been let in by Sasha, and someone she trusted. Well, unless she was that type of person to just let in her slayer, like, oh, come kill me, sure, come on in. Sasha's autopsy was performed. The cause of her passing was concluded as constriction around the neck. The security footage from that night at Sasha's apartment building was reviewed. It showed that Sasha walking in behind another resident, as her friends described. It then showed her being followed by the building's security guard. And after that, the security guard is seen taking out a white trash bag. He comes back empty-handed. But the trash bag in the video is the same kind that Sasha had at her apartment. What? So investigators interviewed Stefan Duxbury, the security guard for Sasha's apartment complex. Stephen told him he helped a drunk Sasha get back into her apartment that evening after he found her stumbling around the building. When they made it up to her apartment, Sasha didn't have her key and couldn't remember her key code. He claimed Sasha asked him to walk her to her car to look for her keys. So before they got to her car, Sasha said that she remembered her key code and headed back for her unit. Stephen told Sasha that he would go back to patrolling the hallways and he would come back to her by her apartment to make sure that she got in. Seems like a nice guy. But when he passed by her apartment, she wasn't there. He assumed she just made it in. During his interview, investigators noticed bite marks and scratches on his body. Out of suspicion, the investigators asked to see the shoes that he wore that night. The shoes he showed them did not match the print found at Sasha's apartment. So when Stephen was brought in for a polygraph test, it shows that he was lying. Police obtained a search warrant and looked through Stephen's apartment. They found a pair of shoes that matched the print in Sasha's apartment. Stephen's phone search history also showed that he looked up on how to get past the type of lock on Sasha's door. So he was clearly planning this for quite some time. This wasn't some night that he took advantage of her for being drunk. He had been stalking her. Also, wouldn't he already know how to get past her door lock if he was the building security officer? This guy wasn't very good at his job. Stephen's DNA and fingerprints were tested against those found on the scene. They were a match. Stephen was arrested and charged for the crime against Sasha and for burglary. Like as if the crime wasn't enough, they're gonna add the burglary on top of that. He was given 2 life sentences plus an additional 15 years for the burglary charge. So let's sum this up. A young Florida woman goes out to a bar with some friends. She leaves drunk and stumbles into her very nice and secure apartment building. She confides in a security guard at her building to help her get in safely. But he has other plans and Sasha ends up being rolled up all up in her comforter. Yup, this guy who was supposed to protect her did the exact opposite. Not to mention, he does a terrible job covering up the evidence. It's like, come on, man, like at least put the toilet seat down? God, have some respect for yourself. Well, that just goes to show that you never truly know what people are capable of. What am I capable of, you ask? Bake sweet buns. Stay safe out there, you guys, and thanks for watching.
80-year-old Samuel Little had an interesting upbringing and an even more interesting criminal record. He was born in Reynolds, Georgia. Over the course of his childhood and early adulthood, Samuel had also lived in Ohio, Nebraska, and Florida. At age 15, he was convicted of breaking and entering into a property. This was his first run-in with the law. But wait, there's more where that came from. 5 years later, he was arrested for stealing furniture. He served 3 years in jail for this crime. When Samuel was 42, he was arrested and charged for the demise of 2 young women in different states. One woman was a 22-year-old runaway, known for doing illicit substances. The other victim was a 26-year-old woman who was a heavy drinker and always found herself in the middle of bar fights. Due to lack of evidence and a mistrust of witness testimonies, Samuel was acquitted, which means he was set free and all charges were dropped. Yep, you heard that right. He was let go after committing 2 homicides. Samuel would be known for targeting women who belonged to vulnerable populations and had rocky histories. You know what? This guy. After escaping the wrath of the law not once, but twice, Samuel moved to a town near San Diego, California. During this time, he was arrested 2 more times and served 2.5 years. After he got out of prison, Samuel moved to Los Angeles. Maybe he wanted a fresh new start. In Los Angeles, Samuel was said to have ended the lives of at least 10 people. I retract my previous statement. After years of Samuel flying under the radar, the FBI was ready to catch him for something. In 2012, Samuel was arrested at a homeless shelter in Kentucky for a narcotics charge. After his arrest, officers were able to collect and test his DNA against the evidence from a few different crimes he was believed to be responsible for. He was a match. In 2014, Samuel was found guilty for taking the lives of 3 women. He was sentenced to life for 3 terms without the possibility of parole. About time, 4 years later, Samuel started confessing to more of his crimes. One of his confessions and charges led him to receive another life sentence. If you're keeping track, we're at 4 life sentences right now. After that, Samuel was confessing to life-ending crimes left and right. I mean, if he's already in prison for 4 life terms, you might as well come clean, right? He ended up admitting to taking the lives of 93 people on camera in a series of interviews with Texas Ranger James Holland. There were more than 700 hours of videotaped interviews where Samuel provided explicit details of each horrific crime. 50 of the 93 slayings have been confirmed by the FBI. His terrifying acts took place in 19 different states over the course of more than 35 years. He is now known as the most prolific life-taking criminal in U.S. history. Many of his victims' passings were originally ruled as accidents or overdoses. Some of their remains were never found. So why did Samuel get away with committing such heinous crimes for so long? He admitted to specifically targeting people from marginalized communities who participated in illegal acts themselves. He believed this would make the cases difficult to solve and prosecute. During the course of his many interviews, investigators learned Samuel liked to draw. Officials gave Samuel art supplies to see if he would draw some of his victims who have yet to be identified. Wait, is he being rewarded with a new set of crayons for knocking out 93 people? That doesn't seem right. Samuel sketched around 50 of his victims. He drew them all in detail by memory. Dang, I can't even remember what my breakfast looked like yesterday or this morning. Local police searched through old files for victims and crimes that matched Samuel's sketches and confessions. They haven't had much luck. In efforts to seek justice for those who haven't been identified yet, the FBI released Samuel's sketches. Along with each sketch, whatever information that was given to them from Samuel is also included, including video clips of Samuel describing the details of each case during interviews. Most recently, 2 individuals have come forward believing their mothers were one of Samuel's many victims. And that's a wrap on the Chronicles of Samuel Little. From being arrested for stealing furniture at age 16 to admitting to taking the lives of 93 people and being served with 4 life sentences. This dude has one hell of a past, and we have one hell of a cake pop.
It was believed that Mike hit a stump in his boat, which caused him to fall out into the water and sink. Mike was an alligator snack. Meet Mike Williams, a successful 31-year-old real estate appraiser. And when I say successful, he made $200,000 a year in 2000. Whoa. He married his high school sweetheart, Denise. They had 1 daughter, and one of Mike's favorite hobbies was duck hunting. And no, I'm not talking like the Nintendo game duck hunting. He lived in Florida near Tallahassee, so like the duck hunting makes a lot more sense. On December 16th, 2000, Mike left for an early morning duck hunting trip. He was headed for Lake Seminole with his boat in tow. He told Denise he would be home by noon and to get ready for their 6th anniversary celebration. But Mike ghosted her. At 12 p.m. that day, Denise was worried Mike hadn't come home yet. She called her father, who went to go look for him with Brian, Mike's best friend. They searched the areas of the lake where Mike often hunted. They found his 1994 Ford Bronco near a boat launch. They did not find Mike or the boat. It was very cold and very wet, and a storm was coming in, so they called off the search for the night. The next day, investigators from Florida Fish and Wildlife conducted a search. Because it was reported as a missing hunter, the team initially treated it as a search and rescue. Then Mike's boat was found 225 feet from the boat ramp. In the boat Investigators found Mike's pea shooter still in its case. The boat had a full tank of gas, no signs of Mike. It was believed that Mike hit a stump in his boat, which caused him to fall out into the water and sink. Two most popular theories: Mike was pulled under the water with the weight of his waders. Mike was an alligator snack. Only in Florida is this a reasonable theory for why someone disappears. However, the alligator allegation had a few holes. The day of Mike's disappearance was wickedly cold, and alligators don't typically eat when it's cold. Alligators may attack humans, but they don't eat them entirely. If Mike had been an alligator snack, there would have been leftovers. The search was called off in early February, and most said it could have been continued if Denise demanded so. Denise was avoiding the media at this time. The day after the search, Denise organized a memorial service for her husband. Damn, she moves on quickly. Here's where it gets interesting. 6 months prior to Mike's disappearance, he took out a life insurance policy for $1.5 million, and Denise was the beneficiary. Guess who wrote the policy number? Mike's best friend. So isn't it a bit weird that Denise came to terms with her husband's passing before they even found the body? In June, 6 months after Mike went missing, a pair of fisherman waders were found. The waders were in mint condition. There were no signs of Mike's body or of an alligator attack. In the jacket pocket was a hunting license. It was Mike's. It was still legible and it was in great shape. 6 months later, using the newly discovered evidence in conjunction with the alligator theory, Denise petitioned to have Mike legally declared as deceased. In the state of Florida, you usually have to wait 4 years before making that call. Regardless, Denise's petition was granted. Do you know what that means? Denise gets all the insurance money, all 1.5 million of it. How convenient. So maybe this was all a setup to get her husband's money, but it gets better. 5 years after Mike's disappearance, Denise marries Brian, the guy who sold Mike his life insurance policy. Also his best friend. Holy white wedding cupcakes. Maybe Brian is the perpetrator since he was in on the insurance policy. Denise may have forgotten about her first husband, but Mike's mother, Cheryl, did not give up on her son. She hired a private search team to look for him. Denise tried and threatened Cheryl to stop her search. She told Cheryl that she wouldn't be able to see her granddaughter if she kept looking for Mike. She wanted nothing to do with Cheryl or Mike's brother. Talk about cold-hearted. Cheryl did not give up hope. She bought billboards and ads to seek more information about her son's whereabouts. The case was reopened in 2004 due to new perspectives on the evidence. 1. The boat launch, where Mike's car was found, was unfinished. Mike typically used the neighboring paved boat launches for his trips to the lake. 2, the storm that blew in on the night of Mike's disappearance had winds that would have blown the boat west. 3, when the boat was discovered, the engine was off, but the gas tank was full. If the engine were running when Mike fell off the boat, it would have stayed on and run out of gas. Despite these new arguments, no advances were made. In 2012, Denise and Brian separated. In 2015, Denise filed for a divorce. Brian didn't want the divorce. He was ordered to comply, and there was a house appraisal required. In 2016, on the day of the appraisal, Denise claims that she was taken by Brian. She was driving home from work when Brian climbed over the back seat. He took away her phone and he made her drive to a parking lot. He told her he didn't want a divorce and was planning to end it all. As soon as Brian got out of the car, Denise drove to a police station and told them what happened. Brian was sentenced to 20 years for the kidnapping of Denise. So they can do that, but they can't conduct a proper missing persons investigation. And then Brian confessed into having part in the planning of the hit on Mike. He told officials that he would provide pertinent information if only he was granted immunity. He confessed that it was all Denise's idea. Later that year, Mike was found. So what actually happened? According to Brian's confession, him and Denise were seeing each other. They planned to get rid of Mike so that they could get married. The day that Mike went on a duck hunt, Brian was there too. Brian got Mike to put on his duck waders and pushed him off the boat, thinking he'd sink. Mike found his way to a tree stump, keeping himself above the water. Brian then fired at Mike, and then no more Mike. So I guess it wasn't the alligator after all. After the incident, Brian and Denise waited things out for a bit before deciding to get together. In fact, Brian was married at the beginning of the affair and divorced his first wife to be with Denise. When Denise decided to divorce Brian, he was scared she would tell everyone what happened to Mike. So he did what any scared man would do, and he kidnapped his own wife. After Mike was found and Brian's confession was pieced together, Denise was arrested and charged for the elimination of her first husband, Mike. She pled not guilty. Really? The court disagreed and found her guilty on all charges, and she was sentenced to life in prison. Doesn't this story make you want to get married and then remarried and then divorced and then kidnapped? Whew! From settling down with her high school boyfriend, having an adorable daughter, to conspiring with her husband's best friend on a $1.5 million plot and then marrying him? Denise had quite an interesting series of events, and all I have to say is I hope the money was worth it. You know what else is worth it? These cupcakes. Eat well, watch out for alligators.
A woman named Dorothy Scott was getting a bunch of creepy phone calls from an anonymous dude. This guy harassed her so much that she ended up signing up for karate lessons and even toyed around with the thought of buying a firearm. Despite her efforts, Dorothy disappeared, and people believe her mysterious phone stalker snatched her up. Her body was found 4 years later by a construction worker, but no one was able to figure out what happened, and her case remains unsolved to this day. Shall we dig in? Dorothy Scott was a 32-year-old single mom. She lived with her 4-year-old son at her aunt's home near Anaheim, California. Her baby daddy wasn't in the picture that we know of. Dorothy's parents lived in the area and would often watch her son, Sean, while she went to work. So Dorothy was working as a backroom secretary at 2 jointly owned stores. One was a cannabis and tobacco shop. The other was a psychedelic shop that sold incense and crystals and stuff. That's a pretty unique job. And what even is a backroom secretary? Sounds a little shady to me. Even though she worked at quirky shops that had a lot of personality, Dorothy had a pretty quiet one. One of her coworkers said she was as dull as a phone book. Oh my gosh, I totally forgot about phone books. And damn, Dorothy's coworker is a savage, to just say that flat out. Some of Dorothy's other coworkers, friends, and family described her as dependable, kind, and introverted. She was a devout Christian homebody who didn't drink or use any substances. And at the time of her disappearance, Dorothy wasn't in a relationship that we know of. On the morning of May 28, 1980, Dorothy dropped Sean off at her parents' house before she went to work. She had a meeting at 9 o'clock that night for work, so she told her parents she wouldn't be back to pick up Sean until late. At the meeting, Dorothy's coworker, Conrad, wasn't doing too hot. He couldn't sit still, he was super sweaty, and had a big swollen rash on his arm that looked like it needed medical attention. Dorothy and her other coworker, Pam, decided to leave the meeting early so they could drive Conrad to the hospital. Since this was before the days of cell phones, Dorothy stopped by her parents' house to tell them what was going on and that she didn't know when she'd be back to pick up her son. She also changed her scarf. She had been wearing a black one at work and switched it out for a red one before going to the hospital. Which is so random. Why did she need to change scarves to go to the emergency room? And I guess it wasn't that urgent of an emergency if she felt the need to do that. Once they all got to the hospital, Conrad was brought to the back and Dorothy and Pam stayed out in the waiting room. The doctors determined that Conrad was bitten by a black widow spider. Well, good thing they brought him to the hospital. I mean, it was good for Conrad, not for Dorothy. Conrad was discharged at around 11 that night. He was also given a prescription to get filled. While Conrad and Pam got the prescription filled, Dorothy went to the bathroom and then told them she would go get her car and pull it up to the front of the hospital so they wouldn't have to walk too far. But that was her fatal mistake, because after that, Dorothy was never seen again. Once Conrad and Pam got the prescription filled, they went out to the front to wait for Dorothy. They stood out there for about 20 minutes until they saw Dorothy's car. It was speeding towards them with the headlights on full blast. Conrad and Pam waved their arms to try and get Dorothy's attention, but the car zoomed past them, skirted to the right, and drove out of the parking lot. The lights were so bright, Conrad and Pam said they couldn't even see who was in the car. At first, they thought there may have been an emergency with Dorothy's son or something. They ended up waiting at the hospital for a few hours to see if Dorothy would come back for them, but she never did. Wait, they willingly waited at the hospital after they were already discharged? I could never. Hospitals are the worst. One time, a nurse forced me to watch my mom give birth. I have never been the same since. So after Conrad and Pam waited outside and realized they had been stood up by Dorothy, they called her parents using the hospital phone. They asked if Dorothy ever came by to pick up Sean, but the parents said she never did. Uh-oh. Conrad and Pam then called the police to report their runaway chauffeur as missing. They still weren't that freaked out at this point. They were just more confused as to why Dorothy just up and left them without saying anything. About 5 hours after Dorothy was last seen, police officers found her station wagon. It had been set on fire in an alleyway about 10 miles away from the hospital. No one was inside. Ooh, okay, so things are starting to get freaky. Now, it looks like Dorothy got abducted and someone was trying to cover up their tracks. But who was it? Well, since Conrad and Pam couldn't really see who was driving in the car when it sped off, I'm guessing someone grabbed her in the parking lot and drove off with her in her own whip. Abducted in her own car. Yeah, that's what I'm going with right now. So after the whole burning car situation, officials turned up the heat on their investigation. Okay, maybe that was a bad choice of words, but you get what I mean. When officials talked to Dorothy's parents, they learned something pretty concerning. In the months leading up to Dorothy's disappearance, she apparently got a bunch of disturbing phone calls from an unknown man. Most of the time, the mysterious guy would call Dorothy to profess his love to her, but sometimes he would call and say he hated her and even threatened her a bunch. In one of his calls, the guy said, "When I get you alone, I will cut you up into bits so no one will ever find you." That is terrifying. Why didn't she go to the police after getting a call like that? Another bad thing about this guy and his phone calls is that he knew way too much about Dorothy. He would call and tell her a lot of details about what she was doing each day, even down to the outfit she was wearing. It was obvious that this guy was physically stalking her in order to know all these specifics. In one of his calls, the guy told her to go outside and check her car. When she did, she found a shriveled up rose on her windshield. Whoa, what kind of weird message is this dude trying to send her? And he must have been right in that area to be able to put the flower on her car. Ugh, that's so creepy. Dorothy told her friends and family about her mysterious stalker. She said his voice sounded familiar, but she couldn't pinpoint where she recognized it from. And she apparently felt scared enough about the whole thing that she even started taking karate classes and thought about buying a Glock for protection. I hate that she had to do this. Like, why is our society so skewed that women have to learn martial arts and carry weapons to feel safe in their daily life? Shouldn't the police have been all over finding out who this dude was? Anyway, these calls definitely make it seem like someone was out to get Dorothy. And they didn't stop after she disappeared. A week after Dorothy was last seen, her mom got a call from who she believed was the same dude. When she picked up the phone, the dude asked, "Are you related to Dorothy Scott?" She said yes, and then he said, "I've got her." After that, he hung up. OMG! I would absolutely lose it if I was Dorothy's mom. And I wonder what would have happened if she said she wasn't related to Dorothy. Would the guy have just been like, "Oh, sorry, wrong number"? Or would he have still said the same thing? He probably had this call all planned out, and that would have thrown him way off. So the police tried to track down the guy from the call, but they were unsuccessful. They told Dorothy's parents to not talk to any journalists about their daughter's disappearance because it might negatively impact the investigation. But after about a week, Dorothy's dad couldn't resist. So he called the Orange County Register to talk about his missing daughter. Two things. One, I wonder why they thought them going to the press would be bad for her case. Were they trying to keep it all on the down low so they didn't freak out everyone else in town? Or were they trying to stay quiet and not give the perp clout because that's probably what he wanted? And two, why was the dad itching to be interviewed so bad? Please tell me he didn't look at his daughter's disappearance as his big break. That would be so bad. And things got even crazier after Dorothy's dad went to the press. The Orange County Register published a story in the paper about the details of Dorothy's vanishing. After that, the villainous phone caller gave the newspaper a ring. He talked to one of the editors over the phone and said, "I killed her." I killed Dorothy Scott. She was my love. I caught her cheating with another man. She denied having someone else. I killed her. Whoa, hold up. This guy really just confessed all of that to an editor? And last time I checked, Dorothy's friends and family said she wasn't in a relationship. Maybe this dude had the wrong Dorothy. Or he was delusional and created a whole fantasy about being in a relationship with her. Or maybe Dorothy actually was in a secret relationship with this guy and didn't tell anyone. But that's not all. During his phone call with the editor, Dorothy's stalker dude also gave specific details about the night Dorothy vanished. He said he knew her coworker Conrad was bit by a spider that night. He also said Dorothy was wearing a black scarf at her work meeting and changed into a red scarf after that. Whoa. How would this guy know all of that? I kind of understand how he knew about the whole scarf thing because he had clearly been watching her, but how did he know about the spider bite? Did he pull Conrad's medical records or something? Oh, or maybe Conrad was her stalker. That would explain why the guy knew all of those details. But then who drove away in her car? Okay, I'm just making things confusing. Let's get back to the story. So this guy must have really loved making phone calls because he called Dorothy's parents almost every Wednesday afternoon for 4 years straight. You'd think they'd block the dude at that point because that's so annoying. Oh, but I guess that would defeat the purpose of finding out more information about their daughter or her abductor. The police ended up installing a voice recorder at the parents' house to try and trace the calls, but the guy never stayed on the line long enough for them to get any leads. The creepy phone man specifically called when Dorothy's mom was home alone. But one day, in April of 1984, Dorothy's dad was home to answer the phone. Whatever her dad said was apparently enough to make the guy stop, because after that, he stopped ringing their phone until 4 months later. On August 6, 1984, a construction worker was going about his normal duties when he stumbled across a set of charred human and dog remains side by side. Talk about a memorable day at work. The bones were found at a construction site about 30 feet away from a road in Anaheim. A team of investigators were sent to the scene and determined the remains had been there for about 2 years. They believed they had been burnt in a fire that had previously swept across the site. Well, obviously they were burnt in a fire, duh. In addition to the remains, officials found a turquoise ring and a watch. Dorothy's mom confirmed the watch belonged to her daughter, and a week later, the dental records were confirmed to be a match for Dorothy. But we don't really know much about the dog remains that were found next to her. I'm trying to come up with a theory that would make sense for a dog to be there. Maybe it was the perp's dog? Or the mysterious slayer put the dog there to send some sort of demented message? It could have even been a weird coincidence for all we know. An autopsy was conducted on Dorothy's remains, but the medical examiner couldn't determine much since they were charred. But they did say there were definite signs of foul play. Later that month, a memorial service was held for Dorothy. But just when Dorothy's parents started to get some closure, the creepy man called again. OMG, get a life, bro! He called and asked, "Is Dorothy home?" Really, dude? I think you know the answer to that. Even after all of these calls, the police were still unable to find out any information about who was behind them. They did believe that whoever it was responsible for Dorothy's termination. The only real suspect investigated was Dorothy's baby daddy. But officials ruled him out due to the fact that he was in Missouri when all of this happened. Well, that wasn't enough juice for the people on the internet, so they came up with a suspect and theory of their own. And this is why I love the internet. These web surfing true crime junkies believed Dorothy could have been abducted by a dude named Mike. He was a mechanic who worked near Dorothy's workplace, so he definitely could have known the details of her whereabouts and was around her enough for her to recognize his voice. He also had alternative religious beliefs and was described as an obscure man. But that still doesn't prove he executed Dorothy. No evidence was found to tie Mike to the case, and he ended up passing away in 2000. 2014. Now, it's been over 40 years since Dorothy's disappearance, and things are more confusing than ever. No one knows who made those calls or what happened to Dorothy, and the more time that passes, the more mysterious it all gets. Honestly, I blame the spider for all of this. If it never bit Conrad, none of this would have ever happened. Well, maybe it would, because Dorothy definitely had a crazy stalker man chasing after her. And how much did this dude spend on his phone plan? I don't know, but now that I've told you the full story, I'll leave it up to you to come up with your own theory. Who knows? Maybe you could be the one to solve this mysterious 41-year-old case. If you need me, I'll be eating these carrot cakes.
When James Bulger was just 14 years old, he started a life of crime that would eventually result in him becoming one of the most notorious, ruthless, and wanted Boston gangsters in history. After building up one of the most violent criminal networks in the country, he fled the Boston area in 1995 and wasn't captured until 2011. A bunch of movies, TV shows, and books have been written on the man whose life was so unbelievable that it could sometimes sound stranger than fiction. Whitey was born in 1929 to an Irish Catholic family in Boston, Massachusetts. He was given the name James Joseph Bulger Jr. at birth, but preferred to be called Jimmy. He also tried to get people to call him Boots because he always carried a switchblade in his cowboy boots. But the police apparently didn't like any of those nicknames because they always referred to James as Whitey after his whitish blonde hair. As a kid, Whitey's parents knew right away that he was different. Like when he was 10 years old, he literally lived out every child's dream of running away with the circus. Barnum and Bailey had been in town and he briefly ran away with them. But after a quick stint with the clowns, Whitey knew he was destined for so much more. The Bulger family grew up in South Boston projects where Whitey was described by the neighbors as a dangerous delinquent. He got into a bunch of vicious fights, wild car chases, and often ran around with his crew known as the Shamrocks. Yo, that sounds like the name of a kindergarten soccer team or something. The Shamrocks? Like, how menacing. Whitey dropped out of high school before he could finish, but that didn't surprise his classmates. They said he was someone who always had a car while everyone was just taking the bus. Is that his classmates' way of subtly hinting that he stole the car? Because if so, I love the pettiness of that. Whitey's life of crime began at an early age. When he was just 14, he was arrested for stealing. And well after that, his criminal record would continue to escalate until it was as long as a CVS receipt. Now that's a lot. He was arrested for larceny, forgery, assault and battery, and armed robbery, all before he was old enough to be tried as an adult. He served 5 years in juvie for his crimes, and as soon as he got out, he joined the Air Force. But somehow, not even the Air Force could whip Whitey into shape, because as soon as he joined the force, he had a big falling out with authorities and ended up serving time in military jail for assault. Despite all of this, Whitey was honorably discharged in 1952. So as it turns out, apparently you can be a shit person and still get an honorable discharge. Imagine that. His crimes began to escalate, resulting in a bunch of bank robberies from Rhode Island all the way down to Indiana. And in June of 1956, he was eventually caught and sentenced to 25 years in prison. Whitey was first sent to a federal prison in Atlanta, but got caught making plans to escape, so he got carted off to Alcatraz. Apparently, Whitey really enjoyed his time in Alcatraz. In an interview in 2011, Whitey said that if he could choose the epitaph on his tombstone, it would say, "I'd rather be in Alcatraz." That would be a really good bumper sticker. Hello? Whitey served only 9 years of his 25-year sentence, and when he was released, he got right back to doing what he did best, and that was breaking the law. He became an enforcer for a famous crime boss named Donald Cullen, and at one point, a group war erupted between Cullen's crew and their rivals, the Mullins, and this is when one of the most infamous stories about Whitey took place. In the middle of the crossfire, Donald was struck, and at some point, a guy named Mickey got his nose bitten off. Yeesh. No one knows who actually did the biting, but when you talk to Whitey, you're bound to hear someone ask, "Isn't it the guy who bit someone's nose off?" After Donald was executed in 1972, Whitey left his crew and joined the Winter Hill Group, where he quickly rose in rank. By 1979, Whitey was one of the most famous dudes in Boston organized crime scene. When the Winter Hill leader was sentenced to prison for fixing horse races, Whitey assumed the role of the head honcho. He had a terrorizing presence in the South Boston area, and people were very afraid of him. When a couple decided to open a store in an old gas station where Whitey had his eye for a new meetup spot, Whitey and his crew literally showed up at the couple's house and threatened them. He asked the couple how much they wanted for the store, and when the duo said it wasn't for sale, Whitey's triggerman pulled out his Glock and set it all on the table. The couple's young daughter wandered into the room at this point, and Whitey's sidekick picked her up and put her on his lap and started tousling her hair. This little girl noticed the Glock, picked it up, and started to play with it. She even put it in her mouth at one point, and the sidekick just smiled at the couple like, isn't she cute? Well, after that terrifying situation, the couple got freaked out enough to sell the store to Whitey and his crew for $67,000, even though they initially paid $100,000 for it. And at this store is where another famous Whitey story emerged. Apparently this guy was walking around Whitey's store one day when he turned a corner and bumped into Whitey. He said the cold, hard glare that Whitey gave him was enough to make him soil his pants. From the mid-1970s to the mid-1990s, Whitey and his pals would have control over a significant amount of Boston's illicit substance scene. They also ran multiple illegal gambling and loaning operations. During the 16-year period where the crimes of his crew flourished, Whitey was keeping a huge secret from everyone. He was an FBI informant. Unbeknownst to even his closest of buddies, Whitey was helping bring down some of the biggest organized crime families in the country, while also building up an even bigger and more powerful crime network of his own. Now, apparently Whitey's brother William was a member of the Massachusetts State Senate, and Whitey was able to take advantage of that. He also had a bunch of friends from childhood who became members of the police force, and Whitey knew how to work them. Whitey was pretty good at his gig too. He actually helped the FBI bring down one of the biggest organized crime families in all of New England, the Patriarchas. And all the while, he remained one of the most dangerous and active mob bosses on the East Coast. Sorry, Special Agent John. How much longer is this going to take? I've got a guy's nose I was planning to bite off at 2 o'clock, and I really can't afford to reschedule. In 1994, the DEA and state police launched an investigation into Whitey's gambling and loaning operation. Whitey and his partner in crime were charged, but Whitey was able to slip away with his girlfriend Teresa. Apparently, Whitey had caught word from his FBI handler and longtime friend Special Agent John Connolly that he was going to be indicted, so he and Teresa skipped town as fast as they could. Teresa realized that the hashtag criminal life wasn't really for her, and a month later she returned back home with Whitey so that she could be with her kids. As soon as that was settled, Whitey picked up and fled again. This time he bounced with his new mistress Catherine, and at one point he became the second most wanted man, only after Osama bin Laden. Oh my God, I wonder what his parents would think of that. Like, I'm sure they had hopes of their kid making the Dean's List or the Forbes 30 under 30 list or something, but not the FBI's top 10 most wanted. Okay, so officials wanted to catch Whitey really bad, so a $1 million reward was issued for any information that could lead to his arrest. And in 2011, Whitey's life on the run finally came to the end when the FBI was tipped off about his location. He was caught and arrested in Santa Monica, California. When I first read that, I actually thought it was a typo. The guy was born in 1929 and was still on the run up until the year Party Rock Anthem came out. That's unreal. Well, the 16-year manhunt was finally over. The tipster who helped lead to Whitey's arrest notified the FBI that the 81-year-old man was living in an apartment complex with his mistress, Catherine. And I guess the snitch who ratted Whitey out hit the lotto with that tip since there was $1 million on the line. But I wonder if the tipster was scared of being whacked by one of Whitey's past crew members or something. Whitey could even have a hardcore fan club who was pissed off by the person who got their king arrested. Okay, I've been watching too many crime shows. I can literally turn anything into the most intricate theory. But let's get back to the task at hand, Whitey's arrest. After the FBI got the inside scoop on Whitey's location, they went to his pad and got the manager of the building to ask Whitey to come down to the garage of the complex because the lock on the storage locker was broken. But as soon as Whitey came down, the FBI agent swarmed and arrested him. Eventually, Whitey gave up and told the FBI, "You know who I am. I'm Whitey Bulger." Yeah, I feel like I give up on that point too. I mean, come on, the guy was in his 80s. Inside Whitey and Catherine's apartment, police found 30 firearms, a bunch of knives, some ammunition, and over $822,000 in cash. And did I mention, most of all this stuff was found in the walls. Catherine was also captured and arrested, and in March of 2012, she pleaded guilty for harboring a fugitive and was sentenced to 8 years in prison. In 2013, Whitey went to trial and faced a 32-count indictment which included money laundering, extortion, illicit substance dealing, corrupting FBI and other law enforcement officials, and participating in 19 executions. In 2013, after a 2-month trial, Whitey was found guilty on 31 counts and received 2 life sentences. During Whitey's sentencing, the judge told him, "The scope, the callousness, the depravity of your crimes are almost unfathomable." On October 30th, 2018, Whitey was found unresponsive in his cell after he had been beaten by other inmates at a U.S. penitentiary in West Virginia. He passed away at 89 years old. And finally, Whitey Bulger's reign of terror was over. And while Whitey's career of crime might have been over, the stories that have emerged about him after his passing have continued to paint a picture of one of the most interesting lives ever lived. In 2020, an interview with one of the jurors from Whitey's trial was published. The interview detailed a more sad, complex life than Whitey had previously let on. The juror came forward and said she regretted voting to convict Bulger after he'd written 70 letters to her from prison. In the letters, Whitey talked about the time he spent in prison for his initial bank robberies and described his unwilling participation in a secret CIA experiment with LSD. That's right. Because if running away with the circus at age 10 isn't ridiculous enough, our boy had a brush with MK Ultra. So something that Whitey's lawyers never brought up in the trial was that when Whitey was finishing out his first prison sentence in the late 1950s, the CIA dosed him with the hallucinogen over 50 times. They were in a desperate search for a mind control substance and used Whitey and a bunch of other inmates as guinea pigs. But the CIA didn't tell them about the mind control part of the experiment. They told inmates it was a way to find the cure for schizophrenia and bribe them into participating by offering reduced sentences. And if you don't already think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. Apparently, Whitey hadn't taken anyone's life up until his first prison sentence where he participated in the MK Ultra trials. So a lot of people, including Whitey's juror pen pal, believed the substances messed with his brain and made him into this famous predator. On the flip side of this narrative, a former federal prosecutor gave some insight on why the MK Ultra bit was not used in trial. He said that jurors could sometimes be swayed more by morality than legality. And if the jurors heard that the government loaded Whitey up with hallucinogens, used him as an FBI informant, and then went after him in a big manhunt, it would start to overshadow the ruthless criminal that Whitey really was, potentially swaying some of the jurors. So was he a misunderstood man that was ruined by some government experiment? Well, I feel like the more we continue to find out more about this guy, the more we'll never know. And that is just a taste of the wild life of Whitey Bulger. The dude lived a long, crime-riddled life, and his passing marked the end of an era of crazy crimes and terrible nicknames. Oh, and I can just smell how good this falafel pita is going to be. So I think I'm going to get going and enjoy this while my nose continues to remain intact. We'll see you next time.
If you had millions of dollars, what would you do with that money? Probably travel or invest or something, right? Hearing all these horrible crime stories, I'd probably invest in some security. Well, for one Texas millionaire named Cullen, he spent his dough on a bunch of lawyers to help cover up the slaying of his stepdaughter, and he also paid a hitman to snuff 15 people, including his divorce judge. After all of that, he was never charged for any of the crimes, and is still out there living his best criminal life. Well, actually, his company went bankrupt, and now he sells skin cream for a living, so maybe he's not living his best life. Cullen Davis was born in Fort Worth, Texas in 1933 to a super wealthy family. His full name is actually Theodore Cullen Davis, but I guess he wasn't a fan of his first name because he just went by Cullen. So this dude's family was super rich. His dad, who everyone called Stinky, founded a company in the oil industry that popped off. After Stinky kicked the bucket, Cullen and his two brothers were given equal shares of the family estate and the oil business. Around this time, Cullen had recently gotten a divorce from his first wife. He was apparently super abusive. His wife claimed he beat her and would even slap her in public. Needless to say, the two ended up getting a divorce. And I'm glad that girl got out because Cullen was bad news. During his first marriage, Cullen already had his sights set on another woman. Ugh, he is already so problematic, and we haven't even gotten to the crime. His next lover was a woman named Priscilla, and they actually got married hours after Cullen's dad passed away. Damn. What a quick turnaround there. One moment they're crying over Stinky breathing his last breath. The next thing you know, they're getting hitched. I wonder how the wedding reception was. Like, did they hardcore celebrate, or was it just awkward and creepy? Ooh, I wonder if Stinky made a ghost appearance to show his support. Okay, so Cullen was Priscilla's third husband. They met at a country club and started seeing each other when they were still married to their previous spouses. After sneaking around at hotels for a bit, Priscilla's current husband hired a private investigator who caught the two cheating lovers. Then they each filed for a divorce and decided to get married. So we have two cheaters who end up in the same relationship, and one of them has millions of dollars. This can't go well. Yeah, this can't go well. Our girl Priscilla was super bougie. She was always making sure her platinum blonde hair was in tip-top condition, was often seen in a halter top with a diamond necklace that said, "Rich bitch," and even decorated her and Cullen's skybox at a local sports stadium in all pink. They lived in a hella nice mansion that Cullen shelled out about $6 million to build. $6 million? I can't even fathom having that much money. Must be nice. And even though that already sounds like a lot of money, it was built in 1972. So that would be the equivalent of spending $40 million on a house today. Yo, this dude is rolling in the dough. Based on the price tag, I'm sure you can guess this house was decked out. It was probably cooler than any house on MTV Cribs. And they had some pretty epic houses on that show. My dream house would just have one room full of dogs. Two rooms full of, 5 rooms full of dogs. 7 rooms. Okay, but back to Cullen's pad. This place was insane. It had an indoor pool, a 2,000 square foot master bedroom, 11 bathrooms, tunnels, balconies, and over 100 oil paintings on the wall. In what world would someone need 11 bathrooms in their house? And it's one thing to buy a house that was already built, but Cullen had to go out of his way to request 11 bathrooms to be made. Maybe he just had some digestive issues. But even with all the money, Cullen couldn't make this marriage work either. And his violent tendencies continued. In 1974, Priscilla filed for a divorce. She said Cullen had beat her on multiple occasions and even broke her nose and collarbone one time. Oof. A collarbone injury had to be so painful. And like, how does that even happen? Maybe Cullen hated Priscilla's blinged out necklace, so he reached for it in a fight and somehow snapped her collarbone instead? I don't know, but that sounds awful. Priscilla's oldest daughter also had a few run-ins with Cullen's temper. One time, he literally grabbed her new kitten and flung it to the floor. He later admitted to doing it because his stepdaughter was being a smart aleck. Bro, I already didn't like you for cheating and beating your family, but now you're tossing around a kitten? Who does that? Cullen was a dangerous mess, and Priscilla wanted out, which is why she filed for a divorce. The judge on the divorce case ordered Cullen to move out of the mansion and to send Priscilla $3,500 a month to cover living expenses. Oof, I bet Cullen wasn't happy to hear he was getting evicted from his own mansion. That could definitely make him want revenge. While the divorce was still being finalized, Cullen and Priscilla began openly dating other people. Priscilla hit it off with a guy named Stan, who was a former college basketball star. And things must have been pretty serious because he moved into the mansion with Priscilla and her kids. But one August night in 1976, everything was about to fall apart for Priscilla and her basketball boo. That night, Priscilla and Stan went out to a restaurant for dinner before going to the club with friends to grab a few drinks. They left Priscilla's 12-year-old daughter, Andrea, at home, but they had a super intricate security system, so they thought she'd be okay. Well, they were wrong. After their boozy get-together, Priscilla and Stan drove back to their mansion. You know, the one Cullen built and paid for but was kicked out of? Yeah, that one. They pulled up to the driveway a little after midnight and noticed the security system was disarmed. Uh-oh. Stan went up the back stairs to their bedroom while Priscilla headed for the kitchen. On her way there, Priscilla saw red prints on the wall and noticed the basement door was open. Once Priscilla made it to the kitchen, she was met by a sketchy intruder. It was a dude who was wearing all black clothing. Seems pretty stereotypical for a robber, right? Well, Wait until you hear this. The dude had a dark plastic bag wrapped around his hands and was wearing a woman's wig. Yeah, this bad guy was legit repping some luscious fake locks. I wonder if it was like a cheap wig from Party City, or if he went all out and got a super fancy wig. Either way, I feel like it's a bit weird to wear all black and then a wig. Like, either commit to the classic robber look or go full-on pageant queen, but don't go picking some weird combination of the two. Okay, so Priscilla walked into the kitchen and landed face to face with this suspicious man. The only thing he said to her was, "Hi," and after that, he sent a bullet through her chest. Wait, he said hi before firing at her with a Glock? What a weirdo. Clearly, this guy isn't very experienced in the whole robbing and attacking thing. Like, the wig wearing and the pre-bullet salutation is not normal. Do your research. After Priscilla was hit, she screamed for help. Stan came rushing in and a fight ensued. Stan was a big guy. He was 6 feet 9 inches tall and used to play basketball, so you'd think he'd stand a chance. But the man in the lace front ended up firing multiple bullets at Stan, which knocked him out for good. Priscilla was able to escape and run to get help. She knew the man was Cullen and even screamed that he was trying to execute her. Around the same time, 2 of her neighbors, Bubba and Beverly, pulled up. The guy with the Glock came outside and fired at Bubba. The bullet hit him in the spine and left him paralyzed. Then Beverly screamed, "It's me, Cullen. It's Bev. Please don't shoot me." So she definitely thought this guy was Cullen too. I guess her scream worked because the wigged man didn't send any bullets her way. In fact, he fled the scene and the cops were called. Once police arrived at the mansion, Priscilla and Bubba were rushed to the hospital and Stan was declared lifeless. Oh, and remember when I said Priscilla left her daughter, Andrea, home alone? Well, sadly, she was the first victim of the whole attack. In their initial search, officials found Andrea's limp body in the basement with a bullet wound in her chest. And the worst part about all of this is Priscilla didn't find out about her daughter's execution until she was already at the hospital. Well, that has to go down as the worst day of Priscilla's life. She lost her daughter and lover in the same day, and she was hit in the chest with a bullet. Priscilla told the police she knew the man was Cullen. And I mean, that definitely makes sense. Cullen, who was known for having a temper, was probably super pissed after he got kicked out of his own home and was told to pay his ex-lover thousands of dollars a month. That would also explain the fact that whoever broke in was able to bypass the intense security system. And since it was Cullen's house originally, I'm sure he was familiar with the whole thing. But get this. Earlier that day, the judge on Cullen and Priscilla's divorce case upped Cullen's payments to $5,000 a month and forced him to give Priscilla an extra $27,000 for bills and $25,000 for legal expenses. Well, there we have the motive. That's a lot to shell out each month, especially to someone Cullen hated. But then again, that's pretty much chump change for Cullen. Either way, it must have ticked him off. But how do we know the man in the wig was Cullen? After hearing Priscilla's side of the story, the police thought it was Cullen too. Okay, but who doesn't think it was Cullen at this point? The police went after Cullen and arrested him at his new girlfriend's house. Before that, Cullen's brother apparently called him super early in the morning to tell him what happened with Priscilla. The brother told Cullen about Stan and Andrea's execution and said the police were looking for him. The brother then asked Cullen what he was gonna do about it. And do you want to know what Cullen said in response?
No!
Well, I'm gonna tell you anyway. He said, "I guess I'll go back to bed." What? If I found out the police were about to arrest me for a major crime, I'd either be running for the hills or using my last moments as a free citizen to stuff my face with chocolate or something. But go back to sleep? That's just boring. And I guess Cullen wasn't worried that the cops were coming for him, which is so weird. Well, anyway, the police arrested Cullen and found 5 weapons in the trunk of his car, but none of them matched the one used on Stan and Andrea. And there wasn't really any hard evidence that tied him to the scene of the crime. There were no fingerprints, weapons, footprints, tire tracks, or DNA evidence, so all they could go off of were the eyewitnesses' testimonies. Regardless, Cullen was charged for Andrea's execution. Prosecutors decided to begin with this charge because they knew the jury would be all up in their feels since Andrea was a kid. Oh, and at the time, this charge made Cullen the richest man to have stood trial for an execution in the US. Yeah, I guess most rich people hire other people to do their dirty work, which Cullen apparently tried to do later too. Well, Cullen hired a super expensive celebrity lawyer named Richard Racehorse Haynes. These Texans Americans love their weird nicknames. So Cullen's lawyer did not hold back. He hired investigators to examine Priscilla's private life and figure out the best angle to get her on. Cullen's team also paid a member of the district attorney's office $5,000 a month to spy on the prosecution and get the inside scoop on their strategy. The trial went on for 3 months. The whole time, Cullen's lawyer, Racehorse, was doing everything he could to undermine Priscilla's reputation and credibility. On the stand, he called her out for her medication misuse and asked a bunch of questions about her intimate relationships with other men. Basically, he was trying to knock down her morals to make the jury think she wasn't trustworthy. Racehorse even came up with a few theories about what went down. He said Priscilla and her neighbor Beverly could have covered up the whole thing and set up Cullen so the true villain wouldn't come back after them. Racehorse also believed the real perp could have been Stan, and he actually brought a handful of witnesses to testify who all claimed they thought Stan was a dealer who got caught in a bad deal. Another witness Racehorse brought in was a plant nursery owner who claimed he snuck into the mansion that night to steal back plants that hadn't been paid for. Yo, what? So you're telling me someone decided to break into a multi-million-dollar mansion to grab a few plants that hadn't been paid for? That makes absolutely no sense. OMG, this guy seriously had a fan club. Like, hey rich cheating man, I know you just committed 2 life-ending crimes, but here's some cookies. I hope you enjoy them. Well, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury found Cullen not guilty. You're kidding me, right? It was totally him. Well, I guess I don't know for a fact either, but it really seems like it was him to me. After the trial, Cullen went about his rich elitist life, but several months later, he found himself in cuffs again. This time, it was for hiring a hitman. Cullen's friend apparently came forward to the FBI and told them Cullen asked him to find a hitman to execute 15 people for him. Wait, 15 people? This guy had 15 people in his life that he hated enough to pay to get them executed? Damn. And 2 of the people on the list were Priscilla and the judge who presided over Cullen and Priscilla's case. Dang, Cullen must have been really bent up about the whole monthly allowance thing. Once the investigators were tipped off about Cullen's plans, they set up a sting operation. They put the judge in the trunk of a car, covered him in ketchup to make it look like he had just been snuffed, and took a picture. Cullen's friend, who snitched on him, met up with Cullen in a parking lot. He showed him the picture and requested the money. But little did Cullen know, his friend was recording the whole conversation, and with that, the police arrested Cullen. But Cullen called up his favorite lawyer, Racehorse. Racehorse claimed that the recording of Cullen's voice wasn't enough to prove he actually solicited the alleged slaying. Cullen testified and said he thought Priscilla had framed him. Bro, you just tried to send someone after her. Don't flip this on her now. But once again, the jury found Cullen not guilty, and he was set free. Whoa, whoa, whoa. This is not right. Cullen literally paid a friend to ice 15 people, and the jury's just gonna let him get away with it? Maybe they were so desperate for an autograph that they just agreed to set him free if they got one. Since the prosecution was taking L's left and right, they decided to not bring Cullen to court for Stan's slaying or for Priscilla and Bubba's injuries. Cullen and Priscilla eventually went through with their divorce, and he regained ownership of the mansion. Then, Cullen remarried, and he and his new wife became born-again Christians. They actually destroyed $1 million worth of jade, ivory, and gold objects because they didn't want to honor false gods. So why was this dude tripping over the $5,000 a month for Priscilla when he just flushed $1 million down the drain? And why didn't he at least take the false gods to a pawn shop or something? But Cullen's newfound religious beliefs were just on the rise. He went on to head up a bunch of religious groups in the area, shared his testimony to numerous crowds, and even said he's read the Bible a total of 106 times. Okay, now he's giving himself away. Who has read the Bible 106 times? And this definitely seems like a cover-up to me. Like, I'm all for Cullen believing in the Lord, but he's going out of his way to prove that he's this super devout and wholesome man who would never commit any crimes. I'm not buying it. You want to know who else isn't buying anything? Cullen. The oil industry tanked in the 80s, so Cullen's family business went under and he filed for bankruptcy. Him and his new wife eventually sold their mansion and moved to another town in the area. As for Priscilla, she moved to Dallas after the divorce and blew through all her settlement money. She spent the next 10 years schmoozing her way up the social ladder while racking up her bills. Apparently, this girl had a $1.1 million outstanding balance at Neiman Marcus. But I don't blame her. I spend a lot of money at Bath & Body Works. I just need 20 candles. I don't know what to tell you. In 2001, Priscilla passed away from cancer. Up until her passing, she still insisted Cullen was the man in the wig who slayed her daughter and lover. OMG, that was so much. Let's see if I can recap it all. So a super rich man marries a woman, cheats on her with another woman, gets divorced, marries his mistress, throws his stepdaughter's cat, tries to divorce his second wife, gets kicked out of the house, puts on a wig, and goes back to his house to slay his stepdaughter and wife's new man. He gets out of jail free twice, finds Jesus, loses all of his money, and now he sells lotion. Yeah, this story is loaded. And so are these potatoes that I'm about to eat. Thanks for watching!